My husband canceled our anniversary trip to be with his assistant. He told her I was just a trophy wife with a family trust fund. Neither of them knew I secretly owned the entire resort chain they were escaping to, or that I'd be waiting for them when they arrived. The email notification lit up my phone at 2:37 a.m. In the darkness of our bedroom, the blue glow illuminated the empty space beside me where James should have been sleeping. Instead, he was working late again on the Morrison acquisition. At least, that's what he had told me. I squinted at the screen, momentarily blinded by its brightness. It was a confirmation email from Sapphire Resorts. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Your reservation has been successfully modified. That was strange. We weren't scheduled to visit any of the Sapphire properties until our anniversary trip to Bora Bora next month. A trip I had spent months planning as a surprise for our 10th anniversary. I sat up, suddenly, wide awake. Something wasn't right. I opened the email, and my blood ran cold as I read the details. Our Bora Bora reservation had been changed to accommodate 2 guests instead of 1. The dates had been moved up to next week, and the name on the second. Ticket was Jennifer Palmer, my husband's 28-year-old executive assistant. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The walls of our penthouse bedroom seemed to close in around me as the implications became clear. James wasn't working late tonight. The emergency meetings and client dinners over the past 6 months hadn't been about work at all. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the email, noting all the special requests he had made. Champagne upon arrival, couples massage, private, dinner on the beach. All the romantic touches I had originally planned for us, now repurposed for his rendezvous with Jennifer. I set my phone down on the nightstand, my mind racing with questions. How long had this been going on? Was I the only one who didn't know? Did our friends laugh behind my back at poor, oblivious Catherine? The initial shock gave way to a hollow ache in my chest. 10 years of marriage, built on what I thought was an unshakable foundation of love and respect, now revealed to be nothing but an elaborate facade. I thought we were partners, equals, building our lives together. But apparently, James saw me differently. I picked up my phone again and opened my email, searching for any other correspondence about Sapphire Resorts. There it was, another email from 3 days ago that I had somehow missed. I tapped on it, and my heart sank further. James, I can't wait for our getaway next week. No more sneaking around the office or making excuses to Catherine. Just you and me in paradise. I still can't believe you managed to book the Royal Sapphire Suite. Your trophy wife and her trust fund would be so jealous. See you tomorrow for lunch. Yours always, Jen. Trophy wife. Trust fund. The words stung like physical slaps. Is that how James saw me? Is that what he told people about me? The irony was almost too much to bear. James had no idea that I was far more than a trophy wife with a trust fund. He had no idea that the modest family inheritance I had mentioned when we first met was actually a controlling interest in Meridian Global Investments, the parent company that owned Sapphire Resorts and a dozen other luxury hospitality brands. Worldwide had kept that information private, not out of deception, but because I wanted to be loved for who I was, not what I owned. When James and I met at a charity gala 11 years ago, I was still trying to escape the shadow of my family name. I had introduced myself simply as Catherine Wilson, not Catherine Meridian Wilson, heiress to the Meridian fortune and board member of Meridian Global. James had seemed refreshingly uninterested in my background. He was ambitious, charming, and fiercely intelligent, a self-made man who had built his investment firm from the ground up. I fell in love with his drive, his vision, and what I believed was his integrity. After we married, I maintained my financial independence, but kept the extent of my wealth and influence quiet. I attended quarterly board meetings under my maiden name, reviewed financial reports from my private office, and made decisions that affected thousands of employees, including those at Sapphire Resorts, all while James believed I was simply managing my modest inheritance. It wasn't that I deliberately kept secrets from my husband. There had been moments when I considered telling him everything, but the time never seemed right. As his business grew and his ego along with it, I worried that the knowledge of my true financial status might create an imbalance between us. And part of me cherished being just Catherine in his eyes, not another Meridian heiress to be courted for her connections and capital. Now, as I sat in the darkness of our bedroom, that decision felt foolish, naive. I had protected James's pride while he betrayed my trust. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Elise Chen, COO of Sapphire Resorts, and one of my most trusted executives. I hesitated for only a moment before tapping the call button. It was nearly 3 a.m., but this couldn't. Wait, Elise answered on the third ring, her voice alert despite the hour. Catherine, is everything all right? No, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. But it will be. I need your help with something at the Bora Bora property. As I outlined what I needed, a plan began to form in my mind. James and Jennifer thought they were escaping to a private paradise. They had no idea they were walking into my world, a world where I held all the power. By the time I ended the call with Elise, the first rays of dawn were beginning to peek through the curtains. I moved to the window and looked out over the city, skyline, watching as the morning light gradually illuminated the sleeping metropolis. A strange calm had settled over me, replacing the initial shock and pain. I felt as though I was observing myself from a distance, watching as the woman I had been, trusting, perhaps too accommodating, was replaced by someone harder, colder, more calculating. I thought about the photographs on the mantelpiece in our living room, James and me on our honeymoon in Greece at his firm's launch party, building our dream home on the coast. Had he been thinking of Jennifer even then? Had every smile, every kiss, every intimate moment between us been a lie? I moved through our bedroom, opening the closet door to stare at James's meticulously organized section. Designer suits, bespoke shirts, Italian leather shoes, all paid for with the success of his investment firm, a success he never knew had. Been partially orchestrated through my connections and quiet investments in his early clients. My gaze shifted to my own collection of clothes, and I pulled out the resort wear I had purchased for our anniversary trip. I held up a white linen dress against my body, examining my reflection in the full-length mirror. At 42, I was still beautiful. My dark hair showed no signs of gray, my skin was smooth and tanned from our recent vacation in Saint-Tropez, and my figure had been maintained through rigorous training with a personal coach. No, I was not just some disposable trophy wife to be discarded for a younger model. I was Catherine Meridian Wilson, and it was time that James and Jennifer learned exactly who they were dealing with. I placed the dress back in the closet and reached for my phone again. This time, I called my personal attorney, Marcus Goldstein. Catherine? Marcus sounded concerned. Why are you calling at this hour? Is everything okay? I need you to prepare divorce papers, I said, surprised again by the coolness in my voice. And I need them ready by the end of the week. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Catherine, are you sure? You and James have been together for a decade. Whatever's happened, James is having an affair with his assistant, I cut in. And he's taking her to the Sapphire Resort in Bora Bora next week, to the suite I reserved for our anniversary. I'm sorry, Marcus said after a moment. That's inexcusable. I'll get started on the paperwork right away. But Catherine, given your position and assets, we need to be strategic about this. James signed a prenup, but if he discovers the full extent of your holdings before we file. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He won't, I assured him. Not until I'm ready. I have something planned first. After ending the call with Marcus, I made my way to the kitchen and brewed a cup of strong coffee. As the rich aroma filled the air, I opened my laptop and navigated to the private server where I kept my most important documents. It was time to make some arrangements. James had no idea that his perfect getaway was about to become the scene of his undoing. And Jennifer Palmer was about to learn that the trophy wife she had so casually dismissed was actually her boss's boss's boss. I took a sip of my coffee and began to type. By the time James came home, I would be gone. But not to cry or lick my wounds. No, I was leaving for Bora Bora ahead of them. I would be waiting when they arrived, ready to reveal that the paradise they sought to escape to was, in fact, mine. The game was already over. They just didn't know it yet. The sound of keys in the front door made me glance at the kitchen clock. 6:45 a.m. James was finally home. I remained seated at the kitchen island, calmly sipping my second cup of coffee as he walked in. He looked exhausted. His blue shirt wrinkled, his normally perfect hair disheveled, and his eyes rimmed with redness that spoke of too little sleep and too much whiskey. "Catherine," he said, startled to find me awake. "You're up early." I offered him a measured smile. "Couldn't sleep. Coffee?" James nodded gratefully, placing his briefcase on the counter and loosening his tie. "That would be great. The Morrison deal is turning into a nightmare. We were at the office until 2 a.m. going over the contracts." The lie fell from his lips so easily, so convincingly, that for a brief moment I almost doubted what I knew to be true. "Almost. You poor thing," I said, rising to pour him a cup. "You've been working so hard lately." As I handed him the coffee, I studied the man I had shared my life with for the past decade. James Keller, 45, the picture of success, tall, fit, with just enough silver at his temples to look distinguished rather than old. His investment firm, Keller Capital, managed over $2 billion in assets, and his client list included some of the most influential names in tech, real estate, and entertainment. We had met at the annual Meridian Foundation Charity Gala. I was there representing my family's interests, though I introduced myself simply as a foundation board member. James was there hunting for wealthy clients, though he presented himself as a philanthropist. Perhaps our relationship had been built on half-truths from the very beginning. "What's on your agenda today?" James asked, scrolling through emails on his phone. "Just the usual," I replied. "Lunch with Miranda, then the hospital foundation meeting." I paused, watching him carefully. "And I need to finalize some details for our anniversary trip next month." His fingers paused imperceptibly over his phone, before he continued scrolling. "About that," he said, not meeting my eyes. "I might need to reschedule. The Morrison acquisition is at a critical stage, and I don't think I can get away at that time." I marveled at his performance, the regretful tone, the furrowed brow of a husband disappointed to postpone a special occasion. There was no hint that he had already rebooked the trip for himself and his mistress. "That's a shame," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I was really looking forward to it." "I know, and I'm sorry. I'll make it up to you, I promise. Maybe we can go in the fall instead?" I nodded, thinking about the fall board meetings I would be leading at Meridian Global, decisions I would be making that would affect James's world in ways he couldn't imagine. Maybe. This was our life, our beautiful, enviable, hollow life. We lived in a 5,000-square-foot penthouse in the most prestigious building in the city, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the skyline and the harbor beyond. We had a vacation home in the Hamptons, a cabin in Aspen, and a wine collection worth more than most people's homes. On paper, we were the perfect power couple. James, the financial wizard who had built his firm from nothing, and me, the supportive wife with the right family connections and social graces to help him climb even higher. But the reality was more complicated. When we first met, I was 32 and had just returned from 8 years abroad, where I had been overseeing Meridian Global's European expansion. I was tired of being pursued for my family name and fortune. The men I met either intimidated or entitled, viewing me as a business opportunity rather than a woman. James was different, or so I thought. He was ambitious but self-made, impressed by me rather than my family's legacy. When he asked for my number at the end of the gala, I gave him my personal line, not my business contact. And when he asked about my family, I was deliberately vague, saying only that I had some family money, but wanted to make my own way. It wasn't entirely untrue. I did want to be known for my own accomplishments, not just as another Meridian heiress. By the time we married 2 years later, I was deeply involved in running Meridian Global, but I kept that part of my life separate from our relationship. I maintained an office downtown under my maiden name, attended board meetings while James thought I was at charity events, and made multi-million-dollar decisions between planning dinner parties and attending his firm's functions. It was an exhausting balancing act, but one I had perfected over the years. James finished his coffee and stood up. I should grab a shower and change before my 9 a.m. with the Glendale team. Of course, I said. I'll be out most of the day, so don't wait up tonight if you're working late again. He leaned down to kiss my cheek, and I forced myself not to flinch at his touch. His cologne mingled with another scent, something floral and distinctly feminine. Jennifer's perfume. I'll try not to wake you when I get in, he promised. As he headed toward our bedroom, I pulled out my phone and sent a text to my assistant. Clear my schedule for the next 2 weeks. Personal emergency. Within minutes, my phone rang. It was Diane, my right hand at Meridian Global for the past 15 years, and one of the few people who knew the full extent of both my professional position and personal life. Catherine, is everything all right? Her concern was evident even through the phone. No, I said quietly, moving to the living room to ensure James couldn't overhear from the shower. James is having an affair with his assistant. There was a brief silence before Diane spoke again, her voice tight with controlled anger. That bastard. How did you find out? He rebooked our anniversary trip to Sapphire Bora Bora for next week. With her. The Royal Sapphire Suite? The one you reserved 6 months ago. The very same, Diane swore softly. What do you need me to do? That was why I valued her so much. No wasted time on platitudes or emotions, just immediate readiness to act. I need the company jet ready tomorrow morning. I'm going to Bora Bora ahead of them. And I need you to get me everything you can find. On Jennifer Palmer. Consider it done. And the quarterly board meeting next week. Postpone it to the following week. By then I'll be back and several things will be different. Catherine? Diane hesitated, her voice softening. I know you can handle this, but are you okay? I looked around our perfect home, at the photographs of our perfect life, and felt a strange detachment from it, all as if I were observing someone else's existence. I will be, I said finally. Once I've shown James exactly who he's been sleeping next to for the past 10 years. After ending the call, I moved to my home office, a space James rarely entered, and unlocked the hidden panel in my desk drawer. Inside was a secure satellite phone that connected directly to Meridian Global's security division. This is Catherine Meridian, I said when the call connected. Authorization code Alpha Tango 794. Authenticated, Ms. Meridian. How? May we assist you? I need surveillance on James Keller and Jennifer Palmer, effective immediately. Monitor all communications, track locations, and document all interactions. Full protocol. Understood. Timeline? Until further notice. And this stays at level 1 clearance only. Yes, ma'am. Anything else? I paused, considering. Yes, I want a complete security detail at Sapphire Bora Bora starting tomorrow. They should be invisible to guests but available on my command. We'll arrange it immediately. I ended the call and returned to the kitchen just as James emerged from our bedroom, freshly showered and dressed in a crisp navy suit. If he noticed anything unusual in my demeanor, he didn't show it. "I might be home at a decent hour tonight," he said, checking his watch. "Should we do dinner?" "Actually, I have plans with Melissa," I lied, naming a college friend who lived across the country. "Girls' night." "Right, of course." He seemed almost relieved. "Have fun." I watched him gather his things, slip on his Patek Philippe watch, a gift from me on our 5th anniversary, and head for the door. "James?" I called just as he was leaving. He turned, eyebrows raised in question. For a moment, I considered confronting him then and there, laying out the evidence of his betrayal and watching his carefully constructed world crumble around him. But that would be too easy, too quick. And it would deny me the satisfaction of seeing his face when he realized exactly who I was and what power I held. "Have a good day," I said instead, my smile not quite reaching my eyes. "You too, Kath. Love you." The door closed behind him, and I was left alone in the elegant prison we called home. But not for long. I had a plane to catch, a trap to set, and a husband to destroy. I picked up my phone again and dialed Marcus. "I've changed my mind," I said when he answered. "Don't start the divorce papers yet. I want to handle something first, personally." "Catherine?" "Whatever you're planning." "Don't worry, Marcus. Everything I do will be perfectly legal. James is about to learn that you should never underestimate a woman you believe to be nothing more than a trophy wife." As I ended the call, I felt a strange sense of liberation washing over me. For years, I had lived a double life, powerful businesswoman by day, supportive wife by night. I had diminished myself for James's ego, hidden my accomplishments to protect his pride. No more. It was time for Catherine Meridian to step fully into the light, and for James Keller to discover that he had never really known the woman he had married at all. The moment our front door closed behind James, something inside me broke. The calm facade I had maintained cracked, and the full weight of his betrayal crashed over me like a tidal wave. I sank onto our Italian leather sofa, my body suddenly too heavy to hold upright. For the first time since reading that damning email, I allowed myself to feel everything I had been suppressing: the shock, the humiliation, the rage, and beneath it all, a profound grief for the life I had believed was real. 10 years of marriage, 10 years of supporting his dreams, attending his corporate functions, listening to his ambitions and insecurities late into the night. 10 years of maintaining the delicate balance between my own power and his ego, of carefully constructing a persona that would complement rather than threaten his sense of self. And for what? So he could throw it all away for his young assistant? So he could mock me as a trophy wife while planning romantic getaways in properties I owned? A strangled laugh escaped my throat, edged with hysteria. The irony was almost too perfect. James, who prided himself on his business acumen, on his ability to read people and situations, had completely misread the woman he had been sleeping beside for a decade. I reached for my phone and pulled up a photo we had taken 3 months ago at a charity gala. We looked perfect. James in his tuxedo, me in a midnight blue gown that had cost more than most people's monthly rent. His arm was around my waist, both of us smiling for the camera, the very picture of a successful, happy couple. Had he been seeing Jennifer then? Had he left my bed to text her? Had they laughed about me, the oblivious wife? The thought sent a fresh wave of rage through me. My fingers tightened around the phone until my knuckles turned white. In that moment, I wanted to hurt James as deeply as he had hurt me, to strip away everything he valued: his reputation, his success, his self-image as an honorable man. I thought about calling him, confronting him with what I knew. I thought about forwarding the incriminating email to everyone in his contact list. I thought about showing up at his office and creating a scene that would be impossible to explain away. But none of those reactions would truly satisfy the cold, calculating anger that was crystallizing inside me. No, James deserved something more elegant. Something that would dismantle not just his marriage, but the very foundation of how he saw himself in the world. I stood and moved to the window, looking out at the city that had been my playground and battlefield for decades. As the heiress to the Meridian fortune, I had grown up knowing that I would someday control assets and resources beyond most people's comprehension. I had spent my life preparing for that responsibility, earning advanced degrees in business and law, working my way through every division of Meridian Global to understand its operations from the ground up. When I met James, I was already sitting on the board of directors and secretly being groomed to take over as CEO. My father, always traditional despite his business progressivism, had worried that my position might intimidate potential partners. "Men like to feel like providers, Catherine," he had told me. "Your power will be a gift to the right man, but a threat to the wrong one." I had dismissed his concerns as outdated, but as my relationship with James progressed, I began to see what my father meant. James was confident, but his identity was deeply tied to his role as the successful provider, the self-made man. My family's wealth was already a sensitive subject. My professional achievements and power might have been too much for his ego to bear. So I had compartmentalized my life, keeping my roles as Meridian heir and James's wife separate. It had seemed like the right choice at the time. A small compromise for the sake of harmony, for the man I loved. Now, with the evidence of his betrayal still fresh on my phone, that compromise felt like a terrible mistake. I had diminished myself for a man who had never truly deserved my consideration. Tears burned in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Catherine Meridian didn't cry over men who failed to recognize her worth. She certainly didn't cry over men who betrayed her trust. Instead, I moved to my walk-in closet and pulled out my luggage. As I began to pack for Bora Bora, I cataloged everything I knew about Jennifer Palmer. She was 28, a graduate of a respectable but not elite business school. She had been James's executive assistant for just under 2 years, hired after his previous assistant retired. From what I had observed at company functions, she was intelligent, efficient, and attractive in a carefully cultivated way. Designer clothes just within the range of professional appropriateness, subtle makeup that enhanced rather than masked, her features, and an air of quiet competence that must have appealed to James. I had never seen her as a threat. In fact, I had approved when James mentioned giving her a raise 6 months ago, pleased that he valued loyalty and hard work in his employees. Loyalty. The word tasted bitter now. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Diane. "I have the information you requested on Jennifer Palmer," she said without preamble. "Sending the file to your secure server now, and the jet is scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow." "Thank you, Diane. Anything I should know immediately?" There was a brief pause. "She's been with Keller Capital for 2 years, but she interned there during business school. There's a gap in her employment history that coincides with the period when James was raising capital for his expansion into European markets." I frowned, processing this information. "You think they knew each other before she officially joined the company?" "It's possible. There are several social media photos from industry events where they both appear in the background, dating back nearly 4 years. A cold feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. 4 years? That's almost half our marriage." "Catherine," Diane's voice softened slightly. "The timeline is unclear. These are just appearances at the same events, not evidence of a relationship." I appreciated her attempt at comfort, but the implications were obvious. Whether the affair had been going on for months or years, the betrayal was the same. But the possibility that it had been happening right under my nose for much longer than I initially thought added a new layer of humiliation. "I understand," I said, my voice tight. "Keep digging. I want to know everything about her: professional background, personal relationships, financial status, everything. Of course. There's one more thing you should know. Diane hesitated. Jennifer Palmer has been making inquiries about investment opportunities in the hospitality sector, specifically luxury resorts. A startled laugh escaped me. She has her sights set on more than just my husband, it seems. So it would appear. How ambitious of her. The pieces were coming together in my mind, forming a picture I didn't like. Thank you, Diane. I'll call you once I've settled in Bora Bora. After ending the call, I returned to my packing with renewed purpose. This wasn't just about James's infidelity anymore. This was about a calculated attempt to use my husband, and perhaps, indirectly me, as a stepping stone to greater things. Well, Jennifer Palmer was about to learn a harsh lesson about ambition. She had set her sights on the wrong family and the wrong woman. I selected a white linen dress from my closet, the perfect outfit for revealing oneself as the owner of a luxury resort chain in a tropical paradise. As I laid it carefully in my suitcase, I felt my emotional turmoil hardening into resolve. James and Jennifer thought they were escaping to a private paradise for a romantic tryst. Instead, they were walking straight into my domain, where every staff member, every security camera, every amenity operated under my ultimate authority. They had made me a victim in their narrative, the unsuspecting wife, the trophy on the shelf. But in my world, in the world of Sapphire Resorts and Meridian Global, I was the one with the power. And it was time they both remembered that. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake in our king-sized bed, surrounded by Egyptian cotton sheets and custom pillows, acutely aware of the empty space beside me. James had texted around 10 p.m. to say he was still at the office and would be crashing at the apartment downtown. The downtown apartment, a luxury condo I had purchased as an investment property years ago and allowed him to use for late work nights. I wondered if Jennifer was there with him now, the two of them tangled in sheets I had selected, drinking wine from glasses I had purchased. The thought made my stomach turn. Every corner of my life seemed contaminated by their betrayal. Every memory suddenly suspect. Had he been unfaithful from the beginning? Had our entire marriage been a charade? I tossed and turned, my mind replaying moments from our relationship in a new, harsh light. The business trips that ran long, the late-night calls he stepped out of the room to take, the subtle distance that had grown between us over the past year that I had attributed to work stress or the natural evolution of a long-term relationship. Around 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep and moved to my home office. I opened my laptop and logged into the secure server Diane had mentioned. The file on Jennifer Palmer was comprehensive: education records, employment history, credit reports, even social media activity dating back to her college years. As I scrolled through the information, a more complete picture began to emerge. Jennifer wasn't just some opportunistic assistant who had fallen into an affair with her boss. She was methodical, ambitious, and strategic. She had graduated in the top 10% of her class with a dual degree in finance and hospitality management. Her thesis had focused on investment opportunities in luxury tourism. Before working for James, she had interned at two of his competitor firms and had briefly worked for a hotel development company with properties that directly competed with Sapphire Resorts. Most tellingly, her digital footprint showed a consistent interest in Meridian Global. She had attended industry panels where my father spoke, followed several of our executives on professional networking sites, and had even applied for a management position at one of our subsidiary companies 3 years ago. A position she hadn't gotten. The pieces were coming together in a pattern I didn't like. Had Jennifer targeted James because of his connection to me? Had she somehow discovered my true identity when even he remained oblivious? The thought sent a chill through me. If that were true, then this wasn't just about an affair. This was about someone trying to use my husband to gain access to my family's empire. But even as the theory formed, I found myself questioning it. Was I constructing an elaborate conspiracy to make sense of a simpler, more painful truth? That my husband had simply grown bored with me and turned to a younger woman for excitement? That despite my wealth and power, I had failed at the most basic human connection? Doubt crept in, insidious and painful. Perhaps I was overreacting. Perhaps this was a brief indiscretion, not the calculated betrayal I was imagining. Perhaps I should confront James directly, give him a chance to explain before I upended both our lives. I stared at the framed photo on my desk, James and me on our wedding day, both of us radiant with hope and love. Had that been real? Did I owe it to that younger, more optimistic version of ourselves to at least try to understand what had happened? For a moment, I felt my resolve waver. I reached for my phone, my finger hovering over James's contact. 1. Call could change everything. I could tell him what I knew, ask for his side of the story. We could talk, really talk, for the first time in what felt like years. But then my gaze fell on the open laptop, on the email Jennifer had sent him about their upcoming getaway. Your trophy wife and her trust fund would be so jealous. The casual cruelty of it, the dismissiveness. And James, who had never once defended me or corrected her misconception. James, who had allowed her, perhaps even encouraged her, to believe I was nothing more than a decorative accessory to his success. My finger moved away from the call button. Some betrayals went beyond infidelity. This was about respect, about honesty, about the fundamental truth of who we were to each other. James hadn't just cheated on me. He had diminished me, reduced me to a caricature for his lover's amusement. No, there would be no reconciliation. No heart-to-heart conversation in which he apologized and I forgave. Some bridges, once burned, could never be rebuilt. I closed the Yatsu-e laptop and moved to the window, watching as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky. In a few hours, I would board my private jet to Bora Bora. In a few days, James and Jennifer would arrive at the Sapphire Resort, blissfully unaware that their tropical paradise was about to become the setting for their undoing. But as I stood there, watching the city slowly coming to life, I found myself questioning not my decision to confront them, but how I wanted to do it. What was my true goal here? Revenge? Justice? Or something more complex? A reclaiming of my own identity? Perhaps, for years, I had compartmentalized my life, presenting different versions of myself to different people. The ruthless businesswoman in the boardroom, the gracious hostess at social functions, the supportive wife to James. I had convinced myself that this was necessary, that these different roles were all authentic parts of who I was. But in keeping my world separate, had I somehow lost sight of my true self? Had I become so accustomed to playing these different parts that I no longer knew which one was real? The thought was unsettling. Who was I, really, when all the masks were removed? What did I want beyond the immediate satisfaction of seeing James's face when he realized the extent of his miscalculation? I thought about my parents, about the legacy they had built and entrusted to me. My father, for all his traditional views on marriage, had raised me to be strong, independent, to never let anyone determine my worth. My mother, quieter but no less formidable, had taught me the power of dignity in the face of adversity. What would they advise me to do now? My mother's voice seemed to whisper in my mind. Remember who you are, Catherine. Not who he thinks you are, not who he's tried to make you believe you are, but who you truly are. And who was that? Not just the Meridian heiress, not just James, Keller's wife. I was Catherine Meridian Wilson, a woman who had navigated the shark-infested waters of international business, who had earned her place at the table through intelligence and determination, not just birthright. A woman who had loved deeply, perhaps unwisely, but with her whole heart. That was who I needed to be in the days ahead, my complete, integrated self. Not seeking vengeance from a place of wounded pride, but justice from a place of self-respect and clarity. I made a decision then, as the sun broke over the horizon. I would confront James and Jennifer not as the betrayed wife, not as the powerful CEO, but as myself. All of myself, with nothing held back and nothing hidden. I would let them see, finally, who I truly was. And in doing so, perhaps I would fully see myself as well. I picked up my phone again, but this time I called Elise, my COO at Sapphire Resorts. "Catherine," she answered immediately. "Everything is arranged as you requested. The staff has been briefed, security is in place, and the Royal Sapphire Suite is being prepared for your arrival." "Thank you, Elise. There's been a change of plans. Though, I don't want the staff to know who I am in relation to James and Jennifer. Let them arrive as scheduled, check in normally. I want them to have the full Sapphire experience, every luxury, every courtesy." There was a moment of surprised silence. "Are you sure? After what he's done?" "I'm sure. This isn't about denying them service or embarrassing them publicly. This is about something more personal." "I understand," Elise said, though her tone suggested she didn't. Not really. "It will be as you wish." As I ended the call, I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. The pain and anger were still there, but they no longer consumed me. Instead, they had transformed into something more focused, more purposeful. A determination to reclaim not just my dignity, but my authentic self. Tomorrow, I would fly to Bora Bora. In 5 days, James and Jennifer would arrive, expecting a romantic getaway, and then they would learn exactly who Catherine Meridian Wilson really was. The Meridian Global private jet touched down on Bora Bora's tiny airstrip at just after 2 p.m. local time. Through the window, I could see the crystalline waters of the lagoon, so impossibly blue it seemed unreal. Under different circumstances, I might have paused to appreciate the beauty of it all. The emerald peaks rising from turquoise waters, the perfect white sand beaches, the lush tropical foliage. But today, my mind was focused on more pressing matters. As the jet taxied to a stop, I gathered my belongings, checked my reflection in the compact mirror, composed, professional, not a hint of the emotional turmoil of the past 24 hours visible on my face, and prepared to disembark. Elise was waiting for me on the tarmac, elegant as always in a tailored linen suit despite the tropical heat. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek chignon, her expression a careful blend of professional deference and personal concern. "Catherine," she greeted me with a brief embrace. "How was your flight?" "Productive," I replied, which was true. I had spent the 14-hour journey reviewing Jennifer Palmer's file, reading through Sapphire Resorts' financial reports, and drafting a series of emails to my legal team. Sleep had been impossible, but at least the time hadn't been wasted. Elise nodded, understanding the subtext. "Your suite is ready, and the staff has been instructed as you requested. No one except myself and the head of security knows your true identity or your relationship to the guests arriving on Friday." "Perfect. And the other arrangements? All in place. The surveillance system in the Royal Sapphire Suite has been upgraded. Every call, every conversation within those walls will be recorded and transmitted directly to your private server." I nodded, satisfied. What I was doing walked a fine line of legality, but Sapphire Resorts' terms of service, which James and Jennifer would sign upon check-in, included a clause about monitoring for security purposes. It wasn't ideal, but it would hold up if challenged. "And James? Any update on his movements?" Elise handed me a tablet as we walked toward the waiting golf cart. "He's been at his office all day. Several calls to Jennifer Palmer's direct line. They're being careful, using the company phones rather than personal cells. But our team intercepted this text from his private number to hers about an hour ago." I looked down at the screen, my stomach clenching as I read, "Can't wait for Friday. Just us, the ocean, and no one to answer to for a whole week. I've taken care of everything. C still thinks I'm working on the Morrison deal. No one to answer to, I repeated, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. How convenient for him. Elise gave me a sidelong glance as we settled into the golf cart. Are you sure you want to go through with this, Catherine? We could simply cancel their reservation, cite a plumbing issue or something. You don't have to confront them in person. I considered her suggestion for a moment. It would be easier, certainly. A simple phone call to James revealing that I knew about the affair would accomplish the basic goal of ending our marriage, but it wouldn't address the deeper issue, the fundamental dishonesty that had characterized our relationship for years. I need to do this, Elise, I said finally. Not just for the satisfaction of seeing his face when he realizes who I really am, but for myself. I've spent too many years compartmentalizing my life, presenting different versions of myself to different people. It's time to integrate those parts, to be whole. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. Elise had been with Meridian Global for over 15 years, had watched me navigate the complex waters of being a woman in a male-dominated industry. She, more than most, understood the compromises I had made, the masks I had worn. Then we'll make sure it happens exactly as you want, she assured me. The golf cart wound its way through the lush tropical garden that surrounded the main building of Sapphire Bora Bora. The resort was a masterpiece of luxury and environmental harmony, with 50 overwater bungalows arranged in the pattern of a nautilus shell, each offering absolute privacy and unparalleled views of the lagoon and Mount Odomanu beyond. The Royal Sapphire Suite, where James and Jennifer would be staying, where I had originally planned for James and I to celebrate our anniversary, was the crown jewel of the property. Situated at the very end of the longest pier, it offered 3,000 square feet of indoor-outdoor living space, including a private infinity pool, a dedicated staff of 3, and a glass floor in the master bedroom that allowed guests to observe the marine life below. At $1 million per week, it was among the most expensive accommodations in the world, and it was booked solid for the next 3 years. But not for James, of course. As the husband of the majority owner, he had been given priority access. A perk he had never known came from me rather than his own status or connections. As we approached the main building, I felt a shift inside me, a crystallization of purpose that chased away the last lingering doubts. This was the right decision. The only decision that would allow me to move forward with my integrity intact. Elise led me not to the main entrance, but to a discreet side door that opened directly into the management offices. The general manager, Philippe Beaumont, was waiting. For us, his expression carefully neutral. Ms. Wilson, he greeted me with a formal handshake. Welcome to Sapphire Bora Bora. I noted his use of my married name rather than Meridian, so he was playing along with the charade, treating me as just another VIP guest rather than the woman who signed his paychecks. Good. Thank you, Philippe. I trust everything is proceeding according to my instructions? Of course, the Royal Sapphire Suite has been prepared exactly as you specified. The staff assigned to Mr. Keller and Ms. Palmer has been selected from our most discreet team members, and they understand the sensitivity of the situation. Excellent. I handed him a sealed envelope. These are additional instructions to be opened only after Mr. Keller and Ms. Palmer have checked in on Friday. Until then, I am simply Catherine Wilson, a valued guest staying in the Ocean Villa. Philippe accepted the envelope with a nod. Understood. Is there anything else you require? I glanced at Elise, who gave a slight shake of her head. We had covered every contingency, prepared for every scenario. Now it was simply a matter of waiting for the pieces to fall into place. No, that will be all for now. I'd like to rest before dinner. Of course, Malia will show you to your villa. As I followed the young staff member through the lush gardens, toward my temporary accommodation, I reflected on how surreal this all felt. 3 days ago, I had been planning a romantic anniversary surprise for my husband. Now I was orchestrating an elaborate confrontation that would undoubtedly end our marriage and potentially damage his professional reputation. Was I going too far? The question nagged at me, a persistent whisper of doubt. Was this careful planning? This methodical approach to revealing his betrayal, a sign that I had become exactly the cold, calculating businesswoman my father had warned me not to be? But then I remembered James's text. C still thinks I'm working on the Morrison deal. The casual dismissal, the easy lie. And Jennifer's email. Your trophy wife and her trust fund would be so jealous. The contempt, the mockery. No, this wasn't an overreaction. This was a necessary reclamation of my dignity, my identity. This was me finally refusing to be diminished, to be misrepresented, to be anything less than who I truly was. The ocean villa was beautiful, a secluded bungalow perched on stilts over the crystal-clear water of the lagoon. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the ocean and Mount Otomanu, while the private deck featured a plunge pool and direct access to the water below. But as I entered the sprawling suite, I felt none of the pleasure that such luxury would normally evoke. Instead, I moved straight to the secure laptop that had been set up on the desk, logging in to check the latest updates from my security team. There was a new email from Diane, sent just an hour ago. Catherine, our team has uncovered something. You need to see. Jennifer Palmer has been in contact with Victor Chen, CEO of Pinnacle Investments. As you know, Pinnacle has been trying to acquire Meridian assets, especially in the hotel sector, for years. Attached are transcripts of their conversations over the past 3 months. It appears she has been feeding him information about potential Meridian vulnerabilities in exchange for a promised position at Pinnacle once the acquisition goes through. James may or may not be aware of this larger corporate espionage angle. We're still working to determine his level of involvement. We'll update as we learn more. Stay strong. D. I stared at the screen, a cold fury building inside me. This was worse than I had imagined. Not just an affair, but a calculated attempt to undermine my family's company. Jennifer Palmer wasn't just sleeping with my husband. She was actively working to damage Meridian Global. And James? Was he a willing participant in this corporate betrayal, or merely a pawn in Jennifer's larger scheme? Either way, the implications were devastating. I opened the attached transcripts with trembling fingers, scanning through pages of emails and text messages between Jennifer and Victor Chen. The language was carefully coded, but the intent was clear. Jennifer was providing insider information about Meridian Global's hospitality division, information that could only have come from someone with access to James's files or conversations, information that James could only have obtained through me. The realization hit me like a physical blow. James had been using me all along, mining our conversations for information that could benefit his mistress and her corporate sponsor. Every casual question about my day, every seemingly innocent inquiry about my family's business, had they all been calculated attempts to extract valuable intelligence? In that moment, something inside me changed. The last vestiges of doubt and hesitation burned away, replaced by a cold, implacable resolve. This was no longer just about a betrayed spouse seeking justice. This was about protecting my family's legacy, about stopping a coordinated attack on everything I had worked to build. I reached for my phone and dialed Elise's number. Change of plans, I said when she answered. I need security on standby, and I need the legal team ready to move, on my signal. This just became much bigger than a marital dispute. What happened? Elise asked, concern evident in her voice. Our guests aren't just planning a romantic getaway, I replied, my voice hard with newly discovered purpose. They're plotting a corporate takeover, and I'm going to make sure they fail spectacularly. As I ended the call, I walked to the window, staring out at the perfect blue of the lagoon. The beauty seemed incongruous with the ugliness I had just uncovered. The pristine waters a stark contrast to the murky depths of betrayal I was navigating. But one thing was clear. When James and Jennifer arrived in paradise on Friday, they would find not a haven for their affair, but a carefully constructed trap. And I would be there, waiting to spring it. The game had changed, the stakes were higher, and I was more determined than ever to win. The next morning, I woke at dawn after barely 2 hours of fitful sleep. My mind had been racing all night, processing the revelations about Jennifer's connection to Pinnacle Investments and formulating a strategy that would not only address James's betrayal, but also neutralize the corporate threat. I moved to the deck of my villa, watching as the first rays of sunlight painted the lagoon in shades of gold and rose. The beauty was almost painful in its perfection, a stark contrast to the ugliness of the situation I was facing. But I had never been one to wallow in self-pity. Catherine Meridian had built her reputation on turning crises into opportunities, and this would be no different. If James and Jennifer wanted to play corporate espionage, they were about to discover they'd chosen the wrong target. I opened my laptop and created a new document, titling it simply Operation Paradise. Then I began to outline my approach, methodically breaking down the situation into manageable components. First, the evidence. I needed incontrovertible proof of both the affair and the corporate espionage. The surveillance system in the Royal Sapphire Suite would capture any incriminating conversations once James and Jennifer arrived, but I couldn't rely solely on that. I needed historical evidence as well. I drafted an email to Marcus, my attorney. Marcus, I need a forensic team to access James's home office and company computers immediately. Court order attached based on evidence of corporate espionage. Focus on communications with Jennifer Palmer and Victor Chen of Pinnacle Investments. Time is of the essence. Catherine. Next, I needed to understand exactly what information had been leaked to Pinnacle. I called Diane, who answered despite the early hour in New York. I need a complete audit of all Meridian Global hospitality assets, I told her without preamble. Particularly any vulnerabilities that Pinnacle might exploit based on the information in those transcripts. Already ahead of you, Diane replied. The team's been working through the night. Preliminary assessment suggests Jennifer was primarily interested in our expansion plans for Southeast Asia and the refinancing of the European properties. I frowned, making notes on my laptop. Those are both confidential board-level discussions. James shouldn't have had access to that information. Exactly. Diane's voice was grim. Someone at Meridian has been feeding him information beyond what you've shared personally. Find out who, I said, my voice hardening. And lock down all sensitive information immediately. Change access codes. Implement the emergency security protocol. Consider it done. After ending the call, I turned my attention to the third component of my strategy, containing the situation at Sapphire Bora Bora. I needed to ensure that James and Jennifer would be monitored from the moment they arrived. But without alerting them to anything unusual, I contacted Philippe, the resort manager. I want their every movement tracked, I instructed. But subtly. They should feel completely at ease, completely private. I want them to let their guard down entirely. Understood, Ms. Wilson. Our security team will use the Rainbow Protocol. I nodded in approval. The Rainbow Protocol was a surveillance approach we developed for high-profile guests with security concerns. Politicians, celebrities, wealthy families worried about kidnapping. It provided comprehensive coverage while remaining completely invisible to the subjects. And the staff servicing their suite? All vetted personally by Elise. Each one has signed enhanced confidentiality agreements and understands the sensitivity of the situation. Excellent. And Philippe? I want every luxury, every courtesy extended to them. The full Sapphire experience. Nothing should seem amiss. Of course. The final piece of my strategy was perhaps the most important. my own approach to the confrontation. This wasn't just about catching James and Jennifer in the act. It was about revealing the truth, all of it, in a way that would leave no room for denial or manipulation. I opened a new document and began typing, crafting a script for the moment. I would finally step out of the shadows and show James exactly who I was. Every word needed to be perfect, calculated for maximum impact. But as I wrote, I found myself struggling with the tone. Did I want to be cold and businesslike, righteously angry, calm and collected? Each approach had its advantages, but none felt quite right. I stood and moved to the edge of the deck, looking down at the clear water below. A colorful fish darted beneath the surface, unconcerned with the human drama unfolding above. Perhaps that was the answer. Not a carefully scripted confrontation, but something more authentic. After all, wasn't that what this was ultimately about? Reclaiming my authentic self after years of compartmentalization and compromise? I closed the laptop and picked up my phone instead, dialing Elise's number. "I need to change the arrangements for Friday," I said when she answered. "What did you have in mind?" "I want to greet them personally when they arrive. Not as the owner, not yet, but as Catherine Wilson, valued guest staying in a neighboring villa. I want to be invited to join them for dinner that first night." There was a pause, as Elise considered this approach a more personal touch. She said finally, "Let them see you before they know who you really are." Exactly. I want James to look me in the eye, to lie to my face one more time before I reveal the truth. I want to give him every opportunity to be honest, to confess, to show even a shred of the integrity I once believed he possessed. And if he doesn't, then he deserves everything that follows. After finalizing the arrangements with Elise, I spent the rest of the morning coordinating with my legal and security teams back in New York. By noon, I had a comprehensive strategy in place, a multi-layered approach that would address both the personal betrayal and the corporate threat. James and Jennifer would arrive believing themselves to be anonymous guests at an exclusive resort. They would have no idea that every staff member was reporting to me, that every room was monitored, that every move they made was being observed and recorded. They would have no idea that at the precise moment they were sipping champagne on their private deck in Bora Bora, teams of forensic accountants and cybersecurity experts would be combing through James's office and personal devices back in New York, gathering evidence that would be impossible to refute. They would have no idea that Victor Chen of Pinnacle Investments was already being investigated by the SEC, thanks to an anonymous tip from Meridian Global's security team. And most of all, they would have no idea that the woman they had dismissed as a trophy wife, the woman they had betrayed and mocked and underestimated, was about to bring their entire world crashing down around them. As I sat on the deck of my villa, watching the perfect blue of the lagoon stretching to the horizon, I felt a strange sense of calm descend over me. The hurt and anger were still there, a dull ache beneath my breastbone, but they no longer consumed me. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time, a sense of my own power, undiluted by compromise or accommodation. For years, I had dimmed my light for James's benefit, had hidden parts of myself to protect his ego. No more. In 3 days, James and Jennifer would step off a seaplane onto the pristine beaches of Sapphire Bora Bora, expecting a week of secret romance in paradise. Instead, they would walk straight into a trap of their own making, sprung by the woman they had foolishly believed to be nothing more than a decorative accessory in a world built by men. I picked up my phone one last time, sending a text to Diane. "Everything in place. Operation Paradise commences Friday. Prepare for turbulence." Her reply came immediately. "The board is with you. Do what needs to be done. We've got your back." I smiled, a genuine smile that reached my eyes for the first time since receiving that fateful email. James had chosen the wrong woman to betray, and he was about to learn exactly how wrong in the most public, most humiliating way possible. Paradise was about to become his personal hell. The 48 hours before James and Jennifer's arrival passed in a blur of preparation and coordination. I had transformed my ocean villa into a command center, with secure communication lines to New York, legal documents spread across the dining table, and a dedicated team of Meridian Global's top executives on standby. On Thursday morning, I received the first concrete results of our investigation. Marcus called just after breakfast, his voice tight with controlled excitement. "Catherine, the forensic team found something on James's home server, a folder labeled M Global, containing dozens of confidential Meridian documents, expansion, plans, financial projections, board meeting minutes, documents he should never have had access to." I gripped the phone tighter, my suspicions confirmed. How did he get them? That's the interesting part. They appear to have come from multiple sources within Meridian. Some were forwarded from your personal email. Those would be the ones you shared with him, presumably. But others came from someone with the email address t.harrison@meridianglobal.com. Thomas Harrison? I frowned, trying to place the name. He's in middle management at our hospitality division. I've only met him a few times. Well, he's been feeding information to James for at least 8 months, and James has been repackaging it and sending it to Jennifer, who then passes selected bits to Victor Chen at Pinnacle. I closed my eyes, absorbing this new layer of betrayal. Not just James and Jennifer, but someone within my own organization, someone I had trusted with sensitive information. "Have Harrison brought in for questioning?" I instructed. "Quietly. I don't want to tip our hand yet." "Already done. Security picked him up this morning. He's being held in a conference room at Meridian Tower under the pretense of a special project review." "Good. What about Jennifer's devices?" "Our team couldn't access her apartment. She took her laptop with her. But we've gained remote access to her work computer. It's enlightening. She's been documenting her relationship with James in explicit detail, apparently as leverage in case things went south. There are photographs, recorded conversations, even a video that you definitely don't want to see." I winced, the mental image all too vivid. "And the connection to Pinnacle?" "Confirmed. We found emails where Victor Chen promises her a senior vice presidency once the M acquisition is complete. Salary of $2 million plus stock options. They were very careful in their language, but the intent is clear." I felt a surge of cold fury. Jennifer hadn't just been sleeping with my husband. She'd been actively plotting to help dismantle my family's company, a company that employed thousands of people worldwide, a legacy built by 3 generations of Meridians. "Send everything to my secure server," I said. "And have the legal team prepare for immediate action against Harrison, Palmer, and Chen. I want restraining orders, cease and desist letters, the works. But hold until my signal." "Understood. One more thing, Catherine. We found evidence that James has been siphoning funds from your joint accounts into an offshore holding company. Nearly $8 million over the past 2 years. The revelation should have shocked me, but after everything else, it felt almost expected." "Let me guess. A company registered to Jennifer Palmer?" "No, that's the surprising part. It's registered to James and someone named Lydia Morgan. We're still trying to determine who that is." Now that was unexpected. Another woman? Or perhaps a fake identity created to hide the true ownership? "Find out everything you can about Lydia Morgan," I instructed. "And freeze all the accounts immediately." "Already done. The funds have been secured pending investigation of financial fraud." After ending the call with Marcus, I contacted Diane for an update on the corporate side of our operation. "The board is fully briefed and unanimously behind you," she reported. "They've authorized whatever resources you need to contain this situation. As for Pinnacle, our counterintelligence team has identified 3 more of their operatives attempting to infiltrate Meridian subsidiaries. All have been quietly removed and are being questioned. And Victor Chen? Under surveillance. He's on a business trip to Singapore. supposedly negotiating a hotel acquisition. In reality, he's meeting with potential investors for the Meridian takeover attempt. I nodded, though Diane couldn't see me through the phone. Keep monitoring him. I want to know everyone he talks to, everyone he emails. When we move against him, I want it to be comprehensive. Understood. Oh, and Catherine? The background check on Lydia Morgan came back. She's not another mistress. Who is she? James's sister. She's been living in Australia for the past 15 years, apparently estranged from the family. There's no mention of her in any of James's official biographies or social media. I frowned, trying to process this new information. In 10 years of marriage, James had never once mentioned having a sister. Not once. The revelation was yet another reminder of how little I truly knew the man I had married. Send me everything, on her, I said, and have someone discreetly reach out to her. I want to know what she knows. After concluding my calls with the New York team, I moved to the next phase of preparations, securing my position at Sapphire Bora Bora. I met with Elise and Philippe in a private conference room at the resort's management office. The seaplane carrying Mr. Keller and Ms. Palmer is scheduled to arrive at 2 p.m. tomorrow, Philippe confirmed, consulting his tablet. They'll be escorted directly to the Royal Sapphire Suite as VIP guests. The staff has been fully briefed according to the Rainbow Protocol. And the dinner? I asked. Elise nodded. Arranged as you requested. A chance encounter between you and James at the Opal Terrace around sunset, followed by an invitation from the resort manager to join a special chef's table dinner, complimentary for our most valued guests. Perfect. James won't be able to refuse without seeming rude, especially in front of his new girlfriend. He'll want to maintain the illusion of being an important client. And the chef's table has been set up with our most discreet audio and video equipment, Philippe added. Every word will be captured with crystal clarity. I nodded, satisfied with the arrangements. And the staff serving the Royal Sapphire Suite? All briefed. They know to report any unusual conversations or behavior directly to me. And the housekeeping team has been instructed to perform a thorough sweep of the suite while the guests are at dinner, documenting any evidence they find. Excellent. I paused, considering any potential weaknesses in our approach. What about the other guests? Anyone who might recognize me as Catherine Meridian rather than just Catherine Wilson? Philippe shook his head. We've checked the guest list thoroughly. No one with known connections to either Meridian Global or Keller Capital is currently staying at the resort. And the media? I was particularly concerned about the potential for unwanted publicity. What I had planned was dramatic enough without adding tabloid coverage to the mix. Security has been enhanced at all entry points, Elise assured me. No unauthorized personnel will be able to access the resort during your confrontation. I smiled thinly at her diplomatic phrasing. Let's call it what it is, Elise. An ambush. She returned my smile with one of her own, a glint of satisfaction in her eyes. An extremely well-planned, perfectly executed ambush. After finalizing the logistics with Elise and Philippe, I returned to my villa to make one final set of preparations. These were perhaps the most important of all, the personal resources I would need to face James and Jennifer with dignity and strength. I opened my suitcase and removed a small leather case containing photographs and documents I had brought from New York, evidence of my true identity, my true power, that I would reveal at precisely the right moment. There was our marriage certificate, with my full legal name, Catherine Elizabeth Meridian Wilson, clearly visible. There was a recent copy of Forbes magazine with my father and me on the cover, identified as the chairman and CEO of Meridian Global Investments. There were board meeting minutes showing my voting control of the company, my signature on the documents that had funded Sapphire Resort's expansion into the South Pacific. And there was one final item, a small velvet box containing the Meridian family signet ring, an heirloom passed down through generations, traditionally worn by the head of the family. My father had given it to me the day I took over as CEO, a symbol of the trust and responsibility that came with leading one of the world's largest privately held corporations. I had never worn it in James's presence, had kept it locked away in my private safe at Meridian Tower. Now I slipped it onto my right hand, feeling its familiar weight, drawing strength from what it represented. Not just wealth or power, but legacy, integrity, resilience. Tomorrow, when I faced James and Jennifer, I would not be playing the role of the betrayed wife seeking revenge. I would be Catherine Meridian, CEO of Meridian Global, rightful owner of Sapphire Resorts, claiming her true identity after years of unnecessary hiding. As the sun began to set over the lagoon, painting the water in shades of orange and pink, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. Everything was in place. Every resource had been gathered, every contingency planned for. Tomorrow, James and Jennifer would arrive in paradise, expecting a week of secret romance and corporate scheming. Instead, they would walk into a trap of my making, one from which their reputations, and quite possibly their freedom, would not emerge intact. I raised my glass of champagne in a silent toast to the setting sun. Let them enjoy their last night of blissful ignorance. By this time tomorrow, their world would be unraveling around them, strand by carefully pulled strand, and I would be there to watch it happen, no longer hidden in the shadows, but standing proudly in the light of my own power. Friday dawned with perfect clarity, the sky an unbroken expanse of blue stretching from horizon to horizon. As I stood on the deck of my villa, watching the early morning light dance across the surface of the lagoon, I couldn't help but appreciate the dramatic backdrop nature had provided for the confrontation to come. My phone buzzed with a message from Philippe. Seaplane confirmed. ETA 2 p.m. All systems go. I took a deep breath, centering myself. In just a few hours, I would come face to face with my husband and his mistress. The thought sent a flutter of anxiety through my stomach. Not fear, exactly, but a heightened awareness of all that was at stake. Would I be able to maintain my composure when I saw them together? Would my carefully constructed plan unfold as intended? And perhaps most importantly, would I find the answers I needed about James's betrayal? These questions had kept me awake for much of the night, my mind racing with scenarios and contingencies. But now, in the clear light of morning, I felt oddly calm. Whatever happened today, I would face it as my true self. Catherine Meridian, not just Catherine Wilson. That alone felt like a victory. I spent the morning reviewing the final reports from my team in New York. The investigation had yielded even more damning evidence than we'd initially found. Thomas Harrison, the Meridian employee who had been feeding information to James, had confessed under questioning, providing details of nearly a year of corporate espionage. He says James approached him at a company holiday party, Diane reported, during our morning call. Offered him $50,000 for regular updates on confidential Meridian projects. Harrison was having financial troubles, gambling debts, a second mortgage, and he caved. And the connection to Pinnacle? Harrison didn't know about that part. He thought James wanted the information to help his investment firm court new clients. He had no idea James was passing it to Jennifer, who was feeding it to Victor Chen. I nodded, processing this. And James's sister? Lydia Morgan? We made contact. She's interesting. Apparently, she and James had a falling out when their parents died. Something about James taking control of the family assets and cutting her out. She claims he fabricated documents to gain full inheritance. That aligned all too well with what I now knew about my husband's character. So, the offshore account in her name? Not with her knowledge or consent. It appears James used her identity to hide his financial maneuvers. She's furious, as you might imagine, and more than willing to cooperate with any legal action. Good. Keep her close. She could be a valuable witness. After concluding my call with Diane, I set about preparing myself physically and mentally for the encounter ahead. I selected my outfit with surgical precision, a simple but elegant white linen dress that managed to be both casual enough for a resort setting and sophisticated enough to convey authority. I paired it with understated jewelry, small diamond, studs and my platinum watch, and the Meridian signet ring on my right hand. I applied my makeup with care, aiming for a natural look that would reveal nothing of the turmoil beneath. My hair I wore down in loose waves, the way James had always preferred it, a small detail he would recognize and appreciate before understanding its deliberate nature. At precisely 1:30 p.m., I received confirmation that the seaplane carrying James and Jennifer had departed from Tahiti and would arrive on schedule. It was time to set the first phase of my plan in motion. I left my villa and made my way to the Jade Lounge, an open-air bar overlooking the Arrival Pier. From this vantage point, I would have a clear view of James and Jennifer disembarking from the seaplane without being immediately visible to them. I ordered a glass of champagne and settled into a comfortable chair partially screened by a lush arrangement of tropical flowers. The perfect observation post. At 2:07 p.m., the seaplane touched down on the crystal waters of the lagoon, sending ripples across the previously mirror-like surface. I watched as it taxied toward the Arrival Pier, my heart rate accelerating despite my best efforts to remain calm. And then I saw them. James emerged first, handsome as ever in linen trousers and a light blue shirt that matched his eyes. He turned to help Jennifer down the steps, his hand lingering at the small of her back in a gesture of casual intimacy that sent a spike of pain through my chest. Jennifer was exactly as I remembered her from the few times we'd met at company functions. Tall, slim, with honey blonde hair pulled back in an elegant ponytail. She was wearing a flowered sundress that showed off her tanned legs and a wide-brimmed hat that partially obscured her face. From a distance, they looked like the perfect couple, successful, attractive, at ease with each other and their surroundings. I forced myself to take a slow sip of champagne, managing my reaction. Seeing them together was more difficult than I had anticipated, the visual confirmation of James's betrayal landing like a physical blow. For a brief, disorienting moment, I questioned whether I could go through with my plan. Wouldn't it be easier to simply serve James with divorce papers from a distance to end this chapter of my life without the messy confrontation I had engineered? But then I heard Jennifer's laugh, bright, carefree, as she said something to James. That made him pull her closer for a kiss. The casual affection between them, displayed in a public setting without any concern for who might see, solidified my resolve. This wasn't just about a husband's infidelity anymore. This was about respect, about truth, about standing up for myself after years of unnecessary compromise. And it was about protecting Meridian Global from the corporate espionage that James and Jennifer had been engaged in. I watched as they were greeted by Philippe, who played his role perfectly, the deferential resort manager welcoming valued guests. I couldn't hear their conversation from my position, but I could read the body language. James was in his element, the successful businessman accustomed to VIP treatment. Jennifer was trying to appear nonchalant, but her wide eyes and slightly too enthusiastic gestures betrayed her excitement at the exclusive surroundings. They followed Philippe to a waiting golf cart, their luggage being handled separately by discreet staff members. As they disappeared down the path toward the Royal Sapphire Suite, I finished my champagne and stood, smoothing my dress. Phase 1 complete. They had arrived safely, none the wiser to the trap they had walked into. Now, it was time for Phase 2, the accidental encounter. According to our plan, James and Jennifer would be given approximately 2 hours to settle into their suite, unpack, perhaps enjoy a welcome drink on their private deck. At 4:30 p.m., they would be tactfully encouraged by their personal butler to visit the Opal Terrace for sunset cocktails, a tradition for first-time guests at Sapphire Bora Bora, and I would be there, positioned for a seemingly chance encounter. I returned to my villa to wait, checking in with Elise for updates on our guests' movements. They've been shown to the suite, she confirmed. James requested a bottle of Dom Perignon 2008 and ordered lunch to be served on their deck. The butler reports they seem affectionate. I ignored the twist in my stomach at that information. And the audio surveillance? Operational. They've been discussing the view, the amenities, standard tourist appreciation. Nothing substantive yet about business or personal matters. Keep monitoring. Alert me immediately if anything relevant comes up. The next 2 hours passed with excruciating slowness. I tried to distract myself by reviewing documents, making calls to my team in New York, even attempting to read a novel I'd brought along. But my mind kept returning to James and Jennifer, to what they might be doing in the suite that should have been mine, to the conversations they might be having about their future, a future that I had once been a part of. Finally, at 4:15 p.m., Elise called to confirm that our plan was proceeding on schedule. The butler has suggested sunset cocktails at the Opal Terrace and they've accepted. They should be leaving the suite in about 10 minutes. Perfect. I'm on my way. I gave myself a final check in the mirror, adjusted the meridian signet ring so that it was slightly less visible, and headed toward the Opal Terrace. My heartbeat was steady, my breathing controlled, but underneath the calm exterior, adrenaline surged through my veins. This would be the first real test of my plan, my ability to face James and Jennifer without revealing too much, to play the role of casual acquaintance while setting the stage for the evening's revelation. The Opal Terrace was Sapphire Bora Bora's premier viewing spot for the spectacular South Pacific sunsets. An expansive wooden deck extended over the water, with comfortable seating arrangements positioned to maximize the view of Mount Otomanu, silhouetted against the changing colors of the sky. A bar at one end offered signature cocktails and champagne, while discreet servers circulated among the guests. I arrived early, selecting a table that offered both privacy and a clear sightline to the entrance. I ordered a gin and tonic and settled, in to wait, rehearsing potential opening lines in my mind. At precisely 4:45 p.m. they appeared. James was now wearing a different shirt, white linen, casually unbuttoned at the collar, and Jennifer had changed into a simple but elegant black dress that highlighted her slender figure. They paused at the entrance, taking in the view, and James placed his hand at the small of her back in a gesture that was becoming uncomfortably familiar to witness. I took a deep breath and allowed myself to be seen, raising my glass slightly as if just noticing their arrival. For a moment, James's gaze passed over me without recognition, just another resort guest enjoying the sunset. Then his eyes snapped back, widening in shock as he registered exactly who was sitting there, calmly sipping a cocktail in a resort, halfway around the world from where he thought I was. Catherine? The disbelief in his voice was almost comical. He stood frozen, his hand still on Jennifer's back, his expression a mixture of shock and dawning horror. I smiled, letting a hint of genuine amusement show. Hello, James. What a surprise. Jennifer's head snapped around, her eyes widening as she took in my presence. Her gaze darted between James and me, confusion quickly giving way to understanding as she realized exactly who I was. Catherine. James. Repeated, his voice stronger now as he attempted to regain his composure. What are you doing here? I gestured to the chair across from me. Why don't you join me? The sunset from this spot is spectacular. I'd hate for you to miss it. James hesitated, clearly weighing his options. I could almost see the calculations running behind his eyes, the lies he might tell, the excuses he might make. Finally, with visible reluctance, he nodded. Of course. He guided Jennifer toward my table, his hand now gripping her elbow rather than resting casually at her back. The body language shift was subtle but telling, from lover to colleague in the space of a heartbeat. This is Jennifer Palmer, he said as they reached my table. My executive assistant. We're here for a business conference, the Asia-Pacific Investment Summit. I raised an eyebrow, almost impressed by how smoothly the lie came to him. Is that so? How interesting. Please sit down. They took the seats across from me, Jennifer perching on the edge of her chair like a bird ready to take flight at the first sign of danger. James signaled a waiter, ordering whiskey for himself and a glass of white wine for Jennifer without consulting her preference. I had no idea you were traveling, James said, his tone carefully neutral. I thought you were busy with the hospital foundation this week. Change of plans, I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I needed some time away to think. Think? He frowned slightly. About what? Oh, many things. Our marriage, your career, the Morrison acquisition that's been keeping you working such late hours. I emphasized the last words just enough to see a flicker of unease cross his face. The waiter arrived with their drinks, providing a momentary respite from the tension. James took a large swallow of whiskey, while Jennifer left her wine untouched, her fingers fidgeting with the stem of the glass. The Morrison deal is very demanding, James said after a moment, but crucial for the firm's expansion. Jennifer has been instrumental in putting the package together. I'm sure she has, I replied, my gaze shifting to Jennifer. You must be very dedicated to your work, Ms. Palmer. All those late nights at the office with James. Her cheeks flushed, but she met my eyes with surprising steadiness. Mr. Keller sets high standards. I try to meet them. I'm certain you do. I took a sip of my drink, savoring the moment. And this Asia-Pacific Investment Summit, it must be very exclusive. I don't recall seeing it in any of the financial publications. James cut in before Jennifer could respond. It's a private gathering. Invitation only. Very discreet. How fortunate that you were both able to attend, I said. And that you managed to secure accommodations at Sapphire Bora Bora. I understand the Royal Sapphire Suite is particularly difficult to book on short notice. James's knuckles whitened around his whiskey glass. We were lucky. A cancellation opened up. Ah, yes, cancellations. I nodded thoughtfully. They can be so convenient, can't they? The conversation lapsed into uncomfortable silence as the implications of my words hung in the air between us. James drained his whiskey and immediately signaled for another, while Jennifer continued to fidget with her untouched wine. Just as the tension was becoming unbearable, Philippe appeared at our table, his timing impeccable as planned. Mr. Keller. Ms. Palmer? He greeted them with a deferential nod before turning to me. Ms. Wilson, I hope you're enjoying your stay with us. Very much, thank you, Philippe, I replied warmly. He beamed, playing his role to perfection. Excellent. I'm pleased to inform all of you that our executive chef is hosting a special dinner this evening for our most valued guests, an exclusive culinary experience featuring local ingredients prepared with French techniques. We would be honored if you would join us at 8 o'clock. James looked trapped, his eyes darting between Philippe and me. That's very kind, but I'm afraid we have plans. We'd be delighted, Jennifer interrupted, clearly seeing an opportunity to escape the current awkward situation. Wouldn't we, James? It sounds wonderful. Philippe smiled. Excellent. 8 o'clock at the Blue Pearl restaurant. Chef Marcel will be preparing a 7-course tasting menu with wine pairings. Very exclusive. Only 6 guests in total. As Philippe departed, James leaned toward Jennifer, his voice a harsh whisper that was nonetheless clearly audible to me. What are you doing? We can't have dinner with my wife. Jennifer's reply was equally tense. We can't refuse without looking suspicious. Besides, it's a group dinner. We won't have to talk to her directly. I suppressed a smile. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Well, I said, rising from my chair. It seems we'll be seeing each other again this evening. I should go prepare. Enjoy the sunset. It truly is magnificent from this vantage point. I left them sitting there, James visibly shaken, Jennifer attempting to maintain her composure. As I walked away, I could feel their eyes on my back, could almost hear the frantic conversation that would ensue the moment I was out of earshot. Back in my villa, I found Elise waiting for me, her expression eager. How did it go? Perfectly, I replied, feeling a rush of satisfaction. You should have seen his face when he spotted me. Pure panic. And they've agreed to the dinner? They have. Though I suspect they'll be having a rather intense conversation about it right now. Elise smiled, a predatory gleam in her eye. They are? The audio feed from their table just picked up James suggesting they make an excuse and leave the resort. Immediately. Jennifer's arguing against it, says it would look too suspicious and might jeopardize their opportunity. Their opportunity, I repeated, nodding slowly. So she's admitted to him that this trip isn't just about romance. It appears so. She's reminding him that Victor is counting on them and that they need to stick to the plan. A cold anger settled in my stomach at the confirmation of their conspiracy. Have security increase surveillance. I want to know if they attempt to contact Victor Chen or anyone at Pinnacle. Already done. And Catherine? Elise's expression softened slightly. Are you okay? Seeing them together must have been difficult. I considered the question seriously. Was I okay? The sight of James and Jennifer together had been painful, yes. The casual intimacy between them, the visible evidence of their betrayal. It had stung more than I'd anticipated, but there had been something else, something unexpected. As I'd sat across from them, watching James lie so effortlessly, seeing the calculation behind his every word and gesture, I'd felt a strange sense of clarity. The man I was looking at wasn't the man I had married, or perhaps he was, and I'd simply been blind to his true nature. I'm better than okay, I said finally. I'm seeing things clearly for the first time in years. Elise nodded, understanding in her eyes. Good, because dinner promises to be quite an event. As Elise departed to oversee the final preparations for the evening, I moved to the deck of my villa and looked out at the lagoon. The sun was setting in earnest now, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. In the distance, I could make out two figures still sitting at the opal terrace, James and Jennifer, their heads close together in intense conversation. Let them plot and plan, I thought. Let them believe they still had some control over the situation. In a few hours, at the Blue Pearl restaurant, they would discover just how mistaken they were. I fingered the meridian signet ring on my right hand, feeling its weight, its history. Tonight, I would reveal a truth that would shatter James's carefully constructed world. But first, I had a surprise guest to prepare for, someone whose arrival would ensure the evening's drama reached its full potential. I picked up my phone and dialed a familiar number. Marcus, is our special guest on schedule? Landing in 30 minutes, my attorney confirmed. Operation Paradise is ready for Phase 2. I spent the next few hours in careful preparation for the evening ahead. This would be no ordinary dinner. It would be the culmination of my plan, the moment when all the threads I had been carefully gathering would finally come together. I selected my outfit with strategic precision. A midnight blue evening dress that was both elegant and commanding, with a subtle slit up one side that allowed for ease of movement. I paired it with sapphire earrings, a deliberate choice that would take on new meaning by the end of the night, and wore my hair up in a sleek chignon that emphasized the clean lines of my neck and shoulders. The meridian signet ring remained, on my right hand, a constant reminder of who I was and what I was fighting for. At 7:15 p.m., Elise called to confirm that our special guest had arrived and was being briefed on their role in the evening's events. How are they taking it? I asked. Surprisingly, well, Elise replied. Almost eager, in fact. It seems your husband has made more enemies than just you. I smiled, a cold satisfaction spreading through me. And James and Jennifer? What are they doing now? Getting ready for dinner, according to the suite surveillance. James wanted to cancel, but Jennifer convinced him it would be too suspicious. She's insisting they can weather one uncomfortable dinner with you. Little does she know, I murmured. At precisely 7:50 p.m., I left my villa and made my way to the Blue Pearl restaurant. The night air was warm and fragrant with tropical flowers, the path lit by elegant lanterns that cast a soft, flattering glow. Under different circumstances, it would have been romantically idyllic. The Blue Pearl was Sapphire Bora Bora's most exclusive dining venue, a circular pavilion built over the water, with glass panels in the floor illuminated to reveal the marine life swimming below. The restaurant accommodated just 24 guests at a time, each table positioned for maximum privacy while still enjoying the spectacular views. For tonight's special chef's table, a separate area had been arranged, a round table for 6, set upon a slightly raised platform, visible to the other diners but distinctly separate. A statement table for VIP guests. Philippe greeted me at the entrance, the very picture of professional courtesy. "Ms. Wilson, you look lovely this evening. Please allow me to show you to the chef's table. You're the first to arrive." I followed him to the table, noting with approval the careful arrangements, the finest crystal, the gleaming silver, the perfect floral centerpiece that was beautiful without obstructing sightlines between diners. The 6 place settings were arranged with strategic precision, ensuring that I would be seated directly across from James, with Jennifer to his right. "The champagne has been chilled as you requested," Philippe murmured discreetly. "Dom Perignon 2008, the same vintage Mr. Keller ordered for his suite this afternoon." I nodded, appreciating the subtle touch. "And our other guests?" "Arriving momentarily. Mr. and Mrs. Takahashi are already in the main dining room, and Mr. Chen is being escorted from his villa now." The Takahashis were a lovely Japanese couple celebrating their anniversary, genuine guests who had been invited to round out our table and provide a semblance of normalcy to the proceedings. Mr. Chen, no relation to Victor Chen of Pinnacle Investments, was a Malaysian tech entrepreneur who was a regular at Sapphire Properties and had been happy to accept a complimentary tasting menu with the resort's executive chef. "Perfect," I said, taking my seat. "And our special guest?" Philippe's expression remained professionally neutral, but I caught the glint of anticipation in his eyes. "Waiting in the private dining room adjacent to the main restaurant, ready to join us at your signal." "Excellent." As Philippe departed, I surveyed the restaurant. It was filling up with well-heeled guests in evening attire, the ambient lighting creating an atmosphere of intimate luxury. From my position, I had a clear view of the entrance, allowing me to watch for James and Jennifer's arrival. I didn't have to wait long. At precisely 8:02 p.m., they appeared at the restaurant entrance. James was wearing a perfectly tailored navy blazer over a crisp white shirt, his expression carefully composed but betrayed by the tension visible in his shoulders. Jennifer was in a red dress that managed to be both elegant and provocative, her hair swept to one side in a style that had clearly taken some time to perfect. They paused at the entrance, scanning the restaurant, and I saw the exact moment when James spotted me. His step faltered briefly before he recovered, pasting on a social smile that didn't reach his eyes. Philippe greeted them effusively, guiding them toward the chef's table with the perfect balance of deference and authority. As they approached, I rose to my feet, the picture of gracious sociability. "James, Jennifer, how lovely to see you again," I said, my voice warm but carrying just enough volume to be heard by nearby tables. What a coincidence that we're all staying at Sapphire Bora Bora at the same time. James's jaw tightened, but he maintained his facade. "Catherine, you look well." "Thank you. Please, sit down. We're still waiting for our other dining companions." They took their assigned seats, James directly across from me, Jennifer to his right. A server immediately appeared with champagne, pouring generous flutes for each of us. "Dom Perignon 2008, I noted, raising my glass. "Your favorite, isn't it, James? You ordered the same vintage for your suite this afternoon." His eyes narrowed slightly at the revelation that I knew such a specific detail. "You've always had an excellent memory, Catherine." "For some things," I agreed, taking a sip. Though I seem to have completely forgotten that you were attending the Asia-Pacific Investment Summit this week. Remind me, where is it being held? Before James could formulate a response, Philippe returned with the Takahashis, a dignified couple in their 60s who bowed politely as they were introduced. They took their seats to my right, creating a buffer between me and Jennifer. Moments later, Mr. Chen arrived, a jovial man in his 40s with an easy smile and impeccable English. He took the remaining seat to my left, completing our party. As the first course was served, a delicate amuse-bouche of seared scallop with passion fruit and coconut, the conversation remained general and polite. The Takahashis spoke of their anniversary trip around the South Pacific. Mr. Chen discussed his recent sailing adventure, and I contributed occasional observations about the resort's amenities and the spectacular snorkeling in the lagoon. James and Jennifer said little, responding when directly addressed, but otherwise exchanging tense glances that spoke volumes about their discomfort. It was during the second course, a chilled soup of local cucumber and mint, that I decided to begin tightening the noose. James, I said, drawing the attention of the entire table. I was speaking with Marcus yesterday. He mentioned something about irregularities in our joint accounts. Have you noticed anything unusual? James's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. Marcus, your attorney? Why would he be looking at our accounts? I smiled blandly. Oh, just the usual quarterly review. But he seemed concerned about some transfers to an offshore holding company. Something called... I pretended to search my memory. Lydia Morgan Enterprises? Does that sound familiar? The color drained from James's face, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm in the space of a heartbeat. I think that's a conversation best had in private, Catherine. Perhaps you're right, I conceded. Though it's strange that you never mentioned having a sister. Lydia seems quite interesting. Very forthcoming about your financial arrangements. At that key, the mention of his sister, James's alarm transformed into outright panic. He set down his spoon with a shaky hand, nearly knocking over his water glass in the process. Jennifer, sensing the shift in atmosphere, attempted to intervene. This food is exquisite, she said brightly. Have you dined at Sapphire Properties before, Ms. Wilson? I turned my attention to her, a slow smile spreading across my face. Oh, many times. I'm particularly fond of their Southeast Asian locations. The Sapphire Bangkok has an exceptional spa program. Have you been to Thailand, Jennifer? Not yet, she replied, clearly relieved by the change of subject. Though I've been researching luxury properties in the region for personal interest. Really? How fascinating. Victor must appreciate your thoroughness. The name dropped like a stone into the conversation, creating immediate ripples. Jennifer's eyes widened in shock, her composure cracking visibly. I'm sorry, she stammered. Victor? Victor Chen, I clarified, watching her face carefully. CEO of Pinnacle Investments? Your mentor, I believe? The one who's promised you a senior vice presidency once the M acquisition is complete? James's hand shot out to grasp Jennifer's arm, a warning that came too late. The damage was done. I had revealed more knowledge than either of them thought possible, and the effect was electric. The Takahashis and Mr. Chen, sensing the sudden tension, exchanged awkward glances, clearly wondering what they had stumbled into. I think there's been some misunderstanding, James said, his voice tight with controlled panic. Catherine, perhaps we should continue this discussion privately. Why? I asked innocently. I thought we were having such a pleasant dinner. And we haven't even arrived at the main course, or the main event for that matter. At that precise moment, on cue, Philippe approached the table. Chef Marcel sends his compliments and hopes you're enjoying the meal so far. Before the next course, he wanted me to acknowledge our special guest this evening, the owner of Sapphire Resorts, who has graciously joined us incognito. All eyes turned to me expectantly, including James's, whose expression suggested he was anticipating some random CEO he'd need to impress. I smiled, savoring the moment. "Oh, I'm not the owner," I said, watching relief flash across James's face. "But I believe they've just arrived." As if on cue, the restaurant's lighting dimmed slightly, and a spotlight illuminated the entrance, where a striking woman in her early 40s stood framed in the doorway. Tall, slender, with James's blue eyes and the same distinctive jawline, but harder, more determined. Lydia Morgan had arrived. The blood drained from James's face so rapidly I thought he might faint. "Lydia?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "What the hell is she doing here?" But that wasn't the biggest shock yet to come. As Lydia made her way toward our table, her gaze locked on her brother, Philippe spoke again, his voice carrying, clearly through the now hushed restaurant. "Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the owner of Sapphire Resorts and CEO of Meridian Global Investments, Ms. Catherine Meridian." I stood, allowing the spotlight to find me, the Meridian, signet ring now prominently displayed on my right hand, catching the light and drawing every eye in the room. "Thank you, Philippe," I said, my voice steady and clear. "It's a pleasure to finally be recognized as who I truly am." The silence that followed my announcement was absolute, a perfect vacuum of sound that seemed to stretch for an eternity. Every eye in the restaurant was fixed on me, some in curiosity, others in dawning recognition, but none with the perfect storm of shock, horror, and dawning comprehension that transformed James's face. "Catherine? Meridian?" he finally managed, his voice a strangled whisper. "What are you talking about?" I smiled, feeling strangely light, as though a weight I had carried for years had suddenly been lifted from my shoulders. "Catherine Meridian Wilson," I corrected gently. I kept the hyphenated name professionally, though I rarely used it around you. It seemed to upset your equilibrium. Jennifer had gone completely still, her face drained of color as the implications crashed over her. "Meridian Global Investments," she said faintly. You're that Catherine Meridian?" "The very same." I gestured to Philippe, who immediately stepped forward with a folder which he placed before me. "CEO of Meridian Global and majority owner of Sapphire Resorts, including this property and all 37 others in our portfolio worldwide." I opened the folder and removed several documents, spreading them on the table where James could clearly see them. My Forbes magazine cover, board meeting minutes with my signature, the resort's ownership papers. "You see, James, while you thought I was managing a modest trust fund and attending charity luncheons, I was actually running one of the largest privately held corporations in the world. All those afternoons at the hospital foundation, boardy meetings, those charity galas, investment conferences, the family emergency last month in Singapore, acquiring a competing hotel chain." I turned to Jennifer, whose shock was gradually being replaced by calculation as she assessed how this unexpected development affected her plans. "And all those confidential Meridian documents you've been sharing with Victor Chen at Pinnacle? Those came from my company, my family's legacy." The Takahashis and Mr. Chen were watching with undisguised fascination, no longer pretending this was a normal dinner party. To their credit, they remained silent, sensing the gravity of what was unfolding before them. James seemed to be struggling to process the revelation, his mind visibly racing to recalibrate everything he thought he knew about his wife of 10 years. "Why?" he finally asked, his voice barely audible. "Why would you hide this from me? For all these years?" It was a fair question, perhaps the only one he had the right to ask in that moment. I considered it carefully before answering. At first, it was because I wanted to be loved for myself, not my family name or my wealth. When we met, I was tired of being pursued for what I owned rather than who I was. I paused, the memories of our early days together briefly softening my expression, And then, as I came to know you better, I realized how important it was to your sense of self to be the provider, the successful one. Your ego was fragile when it came to female achievement. James flinched, but didn't deny it. So I compartmentalized my life. Catherine Wilson, supportive wife at home. Catherine Meridian, ruthless CEO in the boardroom. It seemed simpler that, a small price to pay for harmony. I shook my head, regret momentarily clouding my features. I see now that it was a mistake. In hiding my true self from you, I allowed you to believe a fiction, that I was somehow less than I am. And perhaps that made it easier for you to justify your betrayal. At this, Lydia stepped forward, having quietly approached our table during my explanation. "Hello, brother," she said, her voice cool but controlled. "Surprised to see me?" James's head snapped toward her, his expression shifting from shock to something closer to fear. "Lydia, what are you doing here?" "I was invited," she replied, nodding toward me. "Your wife wanted me to witness this moment. And after what you did to me, how could I refuse?" I gestured to a waiter, who immediately brought another chair, placing it between me and Mr. Chen. Lydia sat down, her posture rigid with barely contained emotion. "For those who don't know," I explained to the table, "Lydia is James's sister. The sister he never mentioned in 10 years of marriage. The sister whose inheritance he stole through falsified documents after their parents' death. The sister whose identity he hijacked to create offshore accounts for his extracurricular activities." Jennifer's eyes widened, her gaze darting between James and Lydia. "You never said you had a sister," she said accusingly. "And those accounts, you told me they were legitimate business holdings." James's composure was crumbling rapidly, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him in real time. "This is insane," he said, his voice rising. "You're all conspiring against me. I never stole anything from Lydia. The inheritance was rightfully mine. The court disagrees," Lydia said calmly, removing a document from her handbag and placing it on the table. "This was issued yesterday. A formal investigation into the probate of our parents' will. The forensic evidence of forgery is quite compelling." James stared at the document, his face ashen. "This is a private family matter," he said finally, turning to me with desperation in his eyes. "Catherine, whatever you think I've done, we should discuss this privately, as husband and wife." "Husband and wife," I repeated, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "Is that what we were, James? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks more like you were using me. First for my family connections, which helped you build your client base, and then for information you could pass to your mistress's corporate sponsors." I turned to Jennifer, whose expression had shifted from shock to calculation. "Tell me, Jennifer, did you target James specifically because of his connection to me? Or was that just a happy coincidence that Victor Chen decided to exploit?" Jennifer's eyes narrowed, her survival instincts visibly kicking in. "I don't know what you're talking about. James and I are colleagues attending a business conference. Any suggestion of impropriety is completely unfounded." "Really?" I smiled, a cold, dangerous expression that made her flinch. "So you weren't staying together in the Royal Sapphire Suite? You haven't been having an affair for at least 6 months? You haven't been feeding confidential Meridian information to Victor Chen in exchange for a promised position at Pinnacle once they acquire our properties?" I nodded to Philippe, who produced a tablet and placed it before me. "Because we have quite extensive evidence to the contrary. Email exchanges, phone records, hotel receipts, and most damning of all, the recordings from your own suite here at Sapphire Bora Bora, including a very interesting conversation you had just after checking in, where you discussed the Meridian acquisition timeline in rather explicit detail." At the mention of recordings, both James and Jennifer went completely still, the color draining from their faces. "That's illegal," James said hoarsely. "You can't record guests without their knowledge." Actually, we can, I corrected him. It's in the terms of service you signed upon check-in. Standard procedure for security purposes, especially in our high-end suites. Most guests never notice the clause. It's on page 3 of the digital agreement. I gestured to a waiter who began serving the main course, a perfectly prepared fillet of local fish with tropical salsa. The contrast between the elegant food and the dramatic confrontation unfolding at our table created a surreal atmosphere that wasn't lost on anyone present. "Please enjoy your dinner," I said pleasantly. "We've only just begun our evening. And there's so much more to discuss." Jennifer, evidently deciding that continued denial was pointless, abruptly changed tactics. "What do you want, Catherine?" she asked directly. "Money? A public apology? What will it take to make this go away?" I regarded her thoughtfully, appreciating her pragmatism, if not her ethics. Make this go away? I'm afraid that's not possible. The evidence of corporate espionage has already been turned over to the relevant authorities. The SEC is quite interested in Victor Chen's methods, as it happens. I took a bite of my fish, savoring the delicate flavors before continuing. As we speak, teams of forensic accountants are going through every aspect of James's finances, Pinnacle's recent activities, and your personal accounts, Ms. Palmer. The offshore holdings have been frozen, and Meridian's legal team is preparing civil suits against all parties involved. I turned to James, whose expression had shifted from panic to a kind of numb resignation. "As for our marriage, I think we can agree it's over. The divorce papers will be delivered to your office on Monday. Given the circumstances and the extensive prenuptial agreement you signed, I think you'll find the terms ungenerous." James seemed to deflate before my eyes, the full weight of his situation finally sinking in. "Catherine, please," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Everything I built, my firm, my reputation, you'll destroy it all." "No, James," I corrected him gently. "You destroyed it yourself. With every lie, every betrayal, every document. You passed to Jennifer and every dollar you hid offshore. I'm simply making the consequences of those choices public." The restaurant had fallen completely silent, the other diners no longer pretending not to watch the drama unfolding at the chef's table. In the background, I could see Philippe quietly directing his staff, ensuring that while the spectacle continued, the service remained impeccable. "What happens now?" Jennifer asked, her voice small but controlled, the calculation still visible behind her eyes. "Now?" I considered the question, taking a sip of the exquisite wine that had been paired with our fish. "Now we finish our dinner like civilized people. You both return to your suite, which, incidentally, is no longer the Royal Sapphire. You've been downgraded to a standard room, effective immediately. Your belongings have already been moved." "You can't do that," James protested weakly. "I own the resort," I reminded him. "I can do whatever I want. And what I want right now is for you to understand exactly what you've lost. Not just your wife and your reputation, but your freedom. Because corporate espionage is a federal crime, James, one that carries significant penalties." I nodded to the far side of the restaurant, where 2 men in dark suits had appeared, standing discreetly by the entrance. "Those gentlemen are from the FBI's white-collar division. They're not here to arrest you, not yet. That will happen back in New York. Tonight, they're simply ensuring you don't attempt to flee before your flight tomorrow morning." The color that had briefly returned to James's face drained away again. "You're having me arrested?" he whispered, disbelief evident in every syllable. "Not me, specifically," I clarified. "The evidence of your crimes is having you arrested. I'm simply ensuring that justice is served, both personally and professionally." I turned to Lydia, whose expression reflected a complex mixture of vindication and sadness. "Your brother made choices, Lydia. Choices that hurt many people, including you. Now he faces the consequences of those choices." Lydia nodded, her gaze fixed on James with a mixture of pity and lingering anger. You could have shared the inheritance, she said quietly. I would have given you half willingly. Instead, you took it all and left me with nothing. Why, James? We were family. James couldn't meet her eyes. I needed it, he said finally. For the firm. To project the right image, to attract the right clients. You were in Australia, living your bohemian life. What did you need it for? The naked materialism of his answer hung in the air between them, a final confirmation of the man he truly was. Well, I said after a moment of heavy silence, I think we've disrupted this lovely restaurant enough for one evening. I gestured to the Takahashis and Mr. Chen, who had been silent witnesses to the entire exchange. My sincere apologies for involving you in our personal drama. Please accept the entire evening as my guest, with my compliments. The Takahashis bowed politely, while Mr. Chen nodded his understanding, his expression suggesting he had found the entire spectacle more entertaining than uncomfortable. I stood, smoothing my dress with a calm deliberation that belied the emotional turmoil I had experienced over the past hours. James, Jennifer, I wish I could say it's been a pleasure. Lydia, would you care to join me for a nightcap? I suspect we have much to discuss. Lydia stood as well, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I would like that very much, Catherine. As we prepared to leave, James made one final desperate attempt. Catherine, wait. Please. There must be something I can do, some way to make this right. 10 years of marriage? Doesn't that count for anything? I paused, looking back at him with a mixture of pity and resolve. It counted for everything, James. That's why your betrayal cut so deep. That's why the consequences are so severe. I slipped the wedding ring from my finger and placed it on the table before him. Enjoy the rest of your dinner. The 2015 Puligny Montrachet pairs beautifully with the fish. It's worth about $800 a bottle, perhaps the last expensive wine you'll be enjoying for quite some time. With that, I turned and walked away, Lydia at my side, feeling the weight of every eye in the restaurant on my back. But for the first time, in years, I wasn't playing a role or hiding my true self. I was Catherine Meridian, in full possession of my power, my identity, and my future. And it felt absolutely right. Lydia and I walked in companionable silence through the resort's lush gardens, the path illuminated by elegant lanterns that cast a warm glow on the tropical foliage. The night air was heavy with the scent of frangipani and salt spray, a perfect Polynesian evening that seemed surreally disconnected from the drama that had just unfolded. That, Lydia said finally, breaking the silence, was the most satisfying thing I've ever witnessed. I laughed, a genuine sound of amusement that surprised me with its lightness. It did go rather well, didn't it? Well, it was masterful. I've spent 15 years fantasizing about confronting James, and you managed to decimate him in a single dinner. I'm impressed, and slightly terrified. We reached my villa, and I gestured for her to enter. The staff had prepared the space beautifully, in our absence. Subtle lighting, a bottle of cognac with 2 snifters on the coffee table, the sliding doors open to the deck to catch the gentle ocean breeze. Make yourself comfortable, I said, moving to pour us each a measure of the amber liquid. And please don't be terrified. I save that side of myself for people who truly deserve it. Lydia accepted the cognac with a nod of thanks and settled onto one of the deck chairs, looking out over the moonlit lagoon. How much of what happened back there was planned, and how much was improvisation? I joined her on the deck, sinking into the adjacent chair with a sigh of relief. Now that the adrenaline was fading, I could feel the tension of the past days finally beginning to ease. The broad strokes were planned, I admitted. The venue, your arrival, the evidence. But some elements evolved naturally. Jennifer's reaction, for instance, I expected more denial. She's pragmatic, Lydia observed. Once she realized the game was up, she immediately started calculating her options. Yes, that makes her dangerous even now. We'll need to be vigilant. In the coming weeks. We sipped our cognac in silence for a moment, each lost in our own thoughts. The reality of what had just happened, of what I had set in motion, was beginning to settle around me, not with the crushing weight I had feared, but with a strange sense of clarity and purpose. What will happen to them? Lydia asked finally. Legally? They'll both face charges for corporate espionage. James will also be charged with fraud related to your inheritance and the offshore accounts. Victor Chen at Pinnacle is already being investigated by the SEC. The evidence is overwhelming in all cases. And personally? For you, I mean. I considered. The question, swirling the cognac in my glass and watching the way it caught the light. Divorce, obviously. A fresh start. Beyond that. I shrugged. I haven't thought that far ahead. The past week has been consumed with planning this confrontation. You loved him once, Lydia said. Not a question, but a statement. Yes, I acknowledged. Very much. Or at least, I loved who I thought he was. The man I saw tonight. Calculating. Materialistic. Willing to sacrifice even family for financial gain. That's not the James Thuffrey married. Or perhaps it is, and I simply refused to see it. We all have blind spots when it comes to those we love, Lydia said softly. I idolized James when we were younger. My brilliant big brother who could do no wrong. It took his betrayal for me to see him clearly. I nodded, understanding perfectly. When did you first suspect? About the inheritance, I mean. Lydia's expression darkened. Almost immediately. The terms of the will never made sense. Our parents were scrupulously fair in everything. The idea that they would leave everything to James, and nothing to me, was absurd. But I was in Australia, grieving, disconnected from our family lawyers. By the time I started asking questions, James had liquidated most of the assets and integrated them into his business. The legal battle seemed insurmountable. And yet you persisted. For 15 years, she confirmed with a grim smile. Not continuously. There were periods when I gave up, tried to move on with my life. But it always came back to this sense of incompletion, injustice. I needed the truth to be acknowledged, even if I never recovered a penny. I raised my glass in a toast. To persistence, then, and to justice, however long it takes. Lydia clinked, her glass against mine. To justice. We drank, and I felt a connection forming between us. Two women who had been wronged by the same man, now allied in the aftermath of his exposure. What about you? I asked. What happens to Lydia Morgan after this? She looked thoughtful, considering the question seriously. Legally, I'll work with your team to recover what I can of my inheritance. Beyond that? She shrugged. Back to Australia, I suppose. I've built a life there. A good one, despite James's best efforts. What do you do in Australia? I'm a marine, biologist, specializing in reef ecosystems. She gestured to the lagoon stretching before us. Places like this, actually. Studying them, protecting them. I smiled, genuinely interested. That sounds fascinating, and far more meaningful than shuffling investment portfolios, if you don't mind my saying so. It is, she agreed. And while the money would be nice, would have been nice 15 years ago when I was struggling to finish my doctorate, I've made peace with building my life from scratch. She gave me a sidelong glance. Unlike some, I don't measure success in dollars. A refreshing perspective, I said, raising my glass again. And one I share, despite appearances. Meridian Global is my family's legacy, and I take my stewardship of it seriously. But the money itself, the trappings of wealth, I gestured to the luxury surrounding us. It's not what drives me. What does drive you, Catherine Meridian? Lydia asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. I considered the question seriously. perhaps more seriously than I had in years. Purpose, I said finally. The knowledge that what I'm building will outlast me, will provide for thousands of families, will create something of value in the world. I smiled ruefully. Terribly earnest, I know. Not at all, Lydia said. It's refreshingly honest, and explains why my brother's betrayal cut so deep. Yes, I acknowledged. It wasn't just the affair, humiliating as that was. It was the corporate espionage, the willingness to undermine, something I've dedicated my life to building and protecting. That was the true betrayal. We fell silent again, each processing the evening's events in our own way. The cognac was warm in my chest, soothing some of the rawness that the confrontation had left behind. After a while, I found myself speaking again, voicing thoughts I hadn't fully articulated even to myself. I keep thinking about all the years I spent hiding who I was from James. The constant compartmentalization, the white lies about where I was going and what I was doing, all to protect his ego, to maintain this fiction that he was the successful one, the provider. That must have been exhausting, Lydia observed. It was. And unnecessary, as it turns out, because no amount of self-diminishment on my part could feed the black hole of his insecurity. He still sought validation elsewhere. From Jennifer, from his fraudulent business successes, from the lifestyle he projected. I shook my head, a mixture of regret and dawning clarity washing over me. I compromised myself for nothing. That's perhaps the bitterest pill to swallow. Lydia considered this. Not for nothing, she said finally. You've learned something invaluable about yourself, about what you're willing to accept in a relationship. That seems worth something. I smiled, appreciating her perspective. You're right, of course. And there's a certain freedom in having everything exposed, all the secrets laid bare. I don't have to pretend anymore. Not with James, not with anyone. Freedom, Lydia echoed, raising her glass. I'll drink to that. As we clinked glasses again, my phone buzzed with an incoming message. It was from Elise. J&J have returned to their new accommodations. Security reports he's making calls. Lawyers, presumably. She's packing. Separate rooms, separate activities. The partnership appears to be dissolving rapidly. I showed the message to Lydia, who laughed softly. Rats leaving a sinking ship. How predictable. Indeed. Though I suspect Jennifer will land on her feet. She's resourceful, if nothing else. And James. What becomes of him when the dust settles? I considered this, trying to project the most likely outcome of the legal proceedings that were now in motion. Best case scenario for him? A plea deal, minimal jail time, significant financial penalties. Worst case? Federal prison for corporate espionage and fraud. Either way, his reputation is destroyed, his firm will collapse, and his lifestyle is over. Do you feel vindicated? Lydia asked carefully, studying my face in the soft light. I took a moment to examine my own emotions, to identify exactly what I was feeling in the aftermath of James's public humiliation. It wasn't triumph exactly, nor was it the vicious satisfaction I might have expected. Not vindicated, I said slowly. Resolved, perhaps, as though a chapter that needed to end has finally closed. There's sadness there, certainly. 10 years of my life invested in a relationship built on half-truths and compromise. But also, relief. A sense that I can move forward now, wholly myself, without the constant strain of pretending to be less than I am. Lydia nodded, understanding in her eyes. Resolved. Yes, that's it exactly. Not victory, not vengeance. Just completion. We sat in companionable silence after that, finishing our cognac as the moon rose higher over the lagoon, casting a silver path across the dark water. The night was peaceful. the distant sound of waves breaking on the reef a soothing counterpoint to the emotional turbulence of the evening. Eventually, Lydia stood, stretching slightly. I should go. It's been a long day, and tomorrow promises to be eventful in its own way. I rose as well, walking her to the door. Where are you staying? Philippe arranged a villa for me at the far end of the property. As far from James's new accommodations as possible, she added with a slight smile. Good. And your plans? How long will you remain in Bora Bora? My flight back to Australia is scheduled for Sunday. Unless... She hesitated, then continued with a touch of uncertainty. Unless you think I should stay longer? For the legal proceedings, I mean. I shook my head. No need. My team will coordinate everything with you remotely. Your statement has already been recorded, and the documentation you provided is more than sufficient for the initial filings. At the door, Lydia turned to face me, her expression serious. Thank you, Catherine, for believing me when I reached out, for giving me the chance to finally confront James, for... She gestured vaguely. All of this. I smiled, genuinely warmed by her gratitude. It was my pleasure, truly, and I hope this isn't the end of our association. Despite the unfortunate circumstances, I've enjoyed meeting you. Likewise, she said, returning my smile. Perhaps when the dust settles, when all the legal matters are resolved. I'd like that, I said sincerely. My work takes me to Australia occasionally. We could have dinner, under considerably less dramatic circumstances. I'd like that too. She hesitated, then added softly, He didn't deserve either of us, you know. Not your loyalty, not my admiration. He never did. No, I agreed. He didn't. But that's his loss, not ours. After Lydia departed, I returned to the deck, pouring myself another small measure of cognac and settling back into the comfortable chair. The events of the evening played through my mind like scenes from a film. James's face when he first spotted me at the Opal Terrace, Jennifer's calculated attempts to maintain their cover story, the moment of revelation when I announced my true identity to the restaurant. It had gone even better than I had planned, each element falling into place with a precision that would have seemed choreographed to an outside observer. The legal consequences were in motion, the professional repercussions inevitable, the personal humiliation complete. Yet as I sat there, watching the moonlight on the water and feeling the gentle tropical breeze on my skin, I found my thoughts turning not to the past but to the future. To the woman I could be now, without the constraints I had placed on myself for James's benefit. To the life I would build, the authentic relationships I might form, the freedom to be fully and unapologetically myself in every aspect of my existence. For the first time since discovering James's betrayal, I felt a sense of genuine optimism about what lay ahead. Not because of what I had taken from him, but because of what I had reclaimed for myself. My identity, my power, my truth. It was, I realized with a small smile, a rather magnificent form of reconstruction. I woke the next morning to the gentle sound of waves lapping against the stilts of my overwater villa. Sunlight streamed through the partially open curtains, casting patterns on the polished wooden floor. For a moment, I simply lay there, allowing the events of the previous evening to settle in my mind. It was done. After days of planning, of gathering evidence and coordinating with my team, the confrontation with James and Jennifer had played out exactly as intended. The immediate consequences were already in motion: legal proceedings, professional repercussions, public humiliation. Justice, in all its forms, was being served. Yet as I rose and moved to the deck to greet the new day, I found myself contemplating not the victory, but the void it left behind. 10 years of marriage, gone. A decade of shared experiences, mutual friends, intertwined lives, all severed in a single evening of calculated revelation. I had anticipated the satisfaction of exposing James's betrayal, had prepared for the legal and financial aftermath, but I hadn't fully considered the emotional landscape I would now have to navigate. The triumph of the previous night was giving way to more complex feelings. Not regret, exactly, but a kind of solemn acknowledgement of all that had been lost. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from Diane. "Good morning," I answered, watching a pair of colorful fish dart beneath my villa. "I assume you've heard about last night's events?" "In glorious detail," Diane confirmed, a note of satisfaction in her voice. "Elise sent a full report. Sounds like it was quite the performance." "Performance," I repeated, considering the word. "Yes, I suppose it was, though the emotions behind it were genuine enough." "Of course," Diane said quickly. "I didn't mean to imply otherwise. Are you okay? Really okay? I mean, not the public version?" I appreciated her concern, the way she was checking in with me as a friend rather than just a colleague. "I'm processing," I said honestly. "It was necessary, and I don't regret it, but there's a certain emptiness afterward. A what now feeling I wasn't entirely prepared for." "That makes sense. You've been so focused on the confrontation, on making James face the consequences of his actions. Now that it's happening, there's bound to be an emotional adjustment." "Exactly." I sighed, looking out over the perfect blue of the lagoon. "Enough about my emotional state, though. What's happening on the business front?" Diane shifted smoothly into her professional mode. "The SEC has formally opened an investigation into Victor Chen and Pinnacle Investments. They've already secured warrants for financial records and email servers. Our legal team is cooperating fully while maintaining our role as the victims in this scenario." "Good. And Thomas Harrison? Singing like a canary. He's agreed to testify against James in exchange for reduced charges. His information has already corroborated what we knew and added several new details about the timeline and specific documents that were compromised." I nodded, though Diane couldn't see me. "And the board? Any concerns about how this might impact Meridian's public image?" "Quite the contrary. They're united in their support of your actions. The general sentiment is that you've handled a difficult, personal situation with remarkable professionalism while simultaneously protecting the company from a serious corporate threat." That was welcome news. I had been concerned that some board members might view the public nature of the confrontation as unnecessarily dramatic or potentially damaging to Meridian's reputation. After concluding my call with Diane, I walked along the shoreline of the resort, watching staff members preparing for the day. Something about their movements, efficient, proud, dedicated, sparked a thought that had been forming in my subconscious for some time. I returned to my villa and made a call to Philippe. "Could you arrange a meeting with all department heads and as many staff members as can be spared? Say 2 hours from now at the main pavilion?" "Of course, Ms. Meridian. May I ask what this is regarding?" "A new direction," I replied. "For Sapphire, Bora Bora, and perhaps for Meridian Global as a whole." 2 hours later, I stood before nearly 100 staff members gathered in the resort's main pavilion. From housekeepers to chefs, groundskeepers to front desk personnel, they represented the heart and soul of Sapphire Bora Bora. "Thank you all for coming," I began, looking out at the sea of curious faces. "Most of you know me only as Catherine Wilson, a guest who visits occasionally. Today I'd like to formally introduce myself as Catherine Meridian, CEO of Meridian Global and the principal owner of Sapphire Resorts." A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd, though I noticed several knowing smiles among the senior staff who had been part of last night's revelations. Recent events have led me to reconsider many aspects of my life, both personal and professional. One realization stands out. I've been hiding my true self, compartmentalizing my identity in ways that ultimately served no one, not my company, not my employees, and certainly not me. I paused, gathering my thoughts. Sapphire Resorts has always operated under a traditional corporate model. Profitable, certainly, but perhaps not as impactful as it could be for the communities we serve. Today, I want to propose a change. Shift toward a more inclusive, community-centered approach to luxury hospitality. I outlined my vision: a profit-sharing program for all employees, educational funds for staff and their children, sustainable development practices that would protect the pristine environment of Bora Bora, partnerships with local businesses and artisans, and a foundation to support indigenous cultural preservation. This resort doesn't exist in isolation, I continued. It's part of an ecosystem, environmental, economic, and social. When that ecosystem thrives, we all thrive. When the community prospers, we prosper. This isn't just idealism, it's sound business practice for the long term. I could see skepticism on some faces, hope on others. Change was never easy, especially when it challenged established hierarchies and practices. I know what you're thinking, I acknowledged with a smile. Pretty words from an executive who will fly back to her New York penthouse tomorrow. But I'm not going anywhere just yet. I'll be staying in Bora Bora for the next month, working alongside you to implement these changes. I want to understand the daily operations, the challenges you face, the innovations you've developed but perhaps never had the opportunity to share. The atmosphere shifted perceptibly, skepticism giving way to cautious optimism. This is just the beginning, I concluded. A pilot program that, if successful, will be implemented across all Meridian properties worldwide. Together, we have an opportunity to redefine luxury hospitality, not just as exceptional service for the privileged few, but as a force for positive change in the communities we serve. As the meeting dispersed, staff members approached me with ideas, questions, and in some cases, personal stories about their lives on the island. I listened to each one, taking notes, making connections, beginning to see Sapphire Bora Bora not just as a luxury property, but as a living community with deep roots in the island's culture and economy. That evening, I sat on my deck watching the sunset, reflecting on the day's events. My phone buzzed with a message from Elise. J&J departed, escorted by FBI to Tahiti for formal questioning before return to U.S., legal proceedings commencing Monday. I acknowledged the message, but found that my thoughts were no longer consumed by James's betrayal or the satisfaction of his downfall. Instead, I was focused on the future, not just my own, but that of the hundreds of people whose livelihoods were connected to Meridian Global and its properties. The painful ending of my marriage had created space for something new to emerge, a more authentic way of living and leading, a vision for my company that aligned with my deepest values rather than with societal expectations or the demands of my ego. Lydia joined me for dinner at my villa, the two of us sharing a meal prepared by the resort's executive chef, who had enthusiastically embraced my suggestion to feature more local ingredients and traditional Polynesian cooking techniques. "I heard about your meeting with the staff," she said, sampling a dish of freshly caught fish marinated in coconut milk and lime. "Quite a change in direction." "Overdue," I replied. "I've been so focused on the numbers, on growth for its own sake, that I lost sight of the human element, the people who make Meridian what it is." "James never would have supported this approach," Lydia observed. "Too soft," he would have said. "Not enough focus on the bottom line." "Precisely why it's necessary," I said with a smile. His vision was always too narrow, too focused on immediate returns and status symbols. I let his perspective influence mine for too long. And now? I looked out at the lagoon, where the lights of the resort created a gentle glow on the water. Now I have an opportunity to lead Meridian in a direction that reflects my true values, to create something meaningful and lasting, something that benefits not just shareholders, but communities. "It won't be easy," Lydia cautioned. "Changing. Corporate culture rarely is. The best things rarely are," I agreed. But for the first time in years, I feel fully aligned with my purpose. No more compartmentalizing, no more diminishing myself to accommodate someone else's ego or expectations. We fell silent, enjoying the meal and the gentle evening breeze. After a while, Lydia raised her glass in a toast. "To new beginnings," she said, "and to the powerful women we've always been, even when others couldn't see it." I clinked my glass against hers. To being exactly who we are, no apologies and no compromises. In that moment, watching the moonlight on the lagoon and sharing a meal with my unexpected new ally, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for years. The pain of James's betrayal was still there, a dull ache beneath my breastbone, but it was no longer the central fact of my existence. Instead, I was focused on the future, on the community I was building, on the legacy I wanted to leave, on the woman I was becoming now that I was finally free to be my authentic self in every aspect of my life. James had canceled our vacation to be with his mistress, never imagining that I owned the resort chain they were escaping to. But in doing so, he had inadvertently given me a gift far more valuable than he could possibly understand: the freedom to reclaim not just my power and my identity, but my purpose and my vision for the future. As Lydia and I continued our dinner, staff members moved about the resort, preparing rooms, serving meals, maintaining the lush gardens. They were no longer just employees to me. They were partners in a shared enterprise, a community working toward a common goal. And I was no longer just their distant employer, but a leader committed to their well-being and growth. The betrayal that had brought me to Bora Bora had been painful, but the transformation it had sparked, in me, in my company, in the lives of those connected to Meridian Global, would ultimately create something far more powerful and lasting than the marriage it had ended. Sometimes the most devastating losses clear the way for our greatest contributions. And sometimes, when we're finally free to be exactly who we are, we discover that who we are is exactly what the world needs. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.